Release that witch eye by Ermu. Chapter 621, Sleepless Night. This is simply God's punishment. Iron Axe sighed. They can only be passively attacked as they can't even see the shadow of their opponents. There's no way for the ordinary enemies to complete the mountain path with the gunfire on their heads. Witnessing the power of Howitzer, the chief commander of the First Army naturally knew the amazing effect when it fell within a densely gathered marching platoon. The first shell landed as far as 5 kilometers away in front of the battlefield. The enemy was running madly throughout the way, or consuming all their energy before the war, or moving forward fearlessly with the incomplete platoon to the battlefield. Of course, the most likely scenario was dispersing in an uproar and turning into escape instead of marching in. Unfortunately, all the enemy we have to face is not normal, Roland smiled and said, and not to mention that there's only a limited amount of shells, otherwise, we can easily wipe out the enemy with the 2 Longsong cannons. As Longsong cannon was firing with the complete ammunition, the firing speed was as high as 8 shots per minute. The firing efficiency could definitely be considered as an absolute insanity in this era. Since the alchemist from King's City moved into Neverwinter with a large batch of apprentices, the production of double-base propellant had been rising steadily, and the number of shells had become the biggest limitation. The fuse trigger could only be manually produced by Anna currently, and its extremely precise mechanical structure had restricted the production of howitzer. Your Majesty, all the 20 cannons have been completely fired, Banner, the battalion commander reported after several repeating fires. A total of 6 valid target data was obtained, and most of them were roughly distributed in the second half of the mountain road. That's good. That's all for today. Roland nodded. After all, the test shells required customized production. Although it was utilizing the solid bullet, the shape and counterweight were exactly like the grenade with the fuse installed. Only Anna could handle such an exquisite task, so she would make time to produce a certain amount of test bullets every day for the artillery battalion test shooting purposes. Do you need to go anywhere else to have a look? Iron Axe asked. No, I'll go back to the camp first, and you continue to arrange the training for the soldiers. Roland contemplated for a moment before he shook his head and said. Yes, Your Majesty, he bowed and said. Returning to the campsite, Roland sighed extensively while leaning back against the couch. He realized that there was nothing much left for him to do, or perhaps, he had done what he could and the rest could only depend on the fate. The church finally responded 5 days ago. According to Maggie's report, the city door of Holy City was opened, and countless men and horses gushed out from the city, heading towards Coldwind Ridge in an orderly line. Looking down from the sky, the shining silver armors of the warriors looked like a river of striking waving light flowing through the impassable mountain range. At the same time, the spy placed around the area of the old Holy City and Hermes Highlands had sent a secret letter, stating that the scale of action of the church was unprecedented. Even the crowd in the city activities was dramatically decreased. Obviously, the enemy was swarming over. After receiving the news, Roland immediately rushed to the front line. And his arrival had boosted the morale of the First Army to the maximum. The war that decided the future of both parties was approaching. There were more than 4,000 elite soldiers, 1 team of reserved knights offered by Duke of the Northern Region, the preliminary investigation group organized by Lightning and Maggie, Sylvie's fire guide that never missed, and the combat witch who scattered around the campsite. It should be a complete preparation. Even the movement of the church was totally in accordance with the battle plan formulated by the advisor department, and the residents in Coldwind Ridge were evacuated. Thus, even if the enemy intended to use berserk pills, they would only consume the believers in Holy City or the forced residents in the other kingdom. The opening was considered pretty perfect. However, Roland was a little worried. He was worried about the pure witches. It was still unknown for the form they would appear to be and in what capacity would they intervene in this battle. In order to prevent the casualties caused by the enemy's sneak attack, the witches in the front line had to be very cautious these few days. They were all gathered in a hall. Sylvie and Nightingale were divided into 2 groups to take a turn on night watch. The entire camp would be awakened by Echo's siren once the magic reaction was encountered. As a result, the church had not taken any further action other than sending soldiers to take over Coldwind Ridge. Roland did not even see any pure witch. He was not sure whether the enemy was planning an earth-shattering conspiracy, or simply disdained to disturb, and planning to crush him into pieces on the official battlefield. Anyway, all he could do now was to continue to wait. Roland was lying on the bed early after dinner. However, he could not fall asleep until the bright moonlight was shining through the window slit onto his bedside. He put on his clothes and walked out of the bedroom. Nightingale, who was staying outside the house, immediately flashed over to him. "Is there anything wrong? Unable to fall asleep?" "Slightly, it's probably due to too much straw below the bed." Roland rubbed his neck and pulled out a wheat leaf from his clothes. "It feels like something is poking my back when I lie on it." "I feel the same." Andrea, who was on the same early midnight team, agreed. "Not to mention moving a big comfortable bed over, but at least it should be layered with 2 extra silk pads. Duke of the Northern Region is too stingy." "Ladies and gentlemen, we're at war, not on an outing," Ashes angrily said. "It's considered good to have a shelter, don't be so demanding." "Of course, it makes no difference for someone who has thick and rough skin. It's better than being weak and fragile." "I think we'll need to have another duel to see who the weak and fragile one is. You'll understand after we finish with the church." "Hold on. Can I place a bet?" Shavy put her hand up and said. Nightingale pulled Roland aside and said, "Don't bother about them, it's a nightly routine." Roland shook his head while smiling. "I would not put them together if I knew it earlier." Due to the fact that Nightingale's scope of investigation was far smaller than that of Sylvie, the combat mission of the early midnight team was handed over to the 3 poker players group. They would be the strongest offensive group with Nightingale, while those who were arranged for the late midnight team were mainly defensive-based. The members were Agatha, Breeze, and Iffy. No one could manage and block the enemy better. "What about the others? Can they adapt?" Roland asked. "Sisters from which cooperation association aren't as picky as you are," Nightingale blinked and said, "and they had experienced the days without shelter and food during their escape, so they could simply close their eyes and fall asleep in this situation." "Well, looks like I'm the most impatient one." Roland sat on the step and kept quiet for quite a while, looking up at the stars, and finally said, "What will we do when all these come to an end?" Nightingale sat beside him and said, "You're getting nervous, aren't you?" Roland touched his nose in guilt and said, "I'm just being a little emotional." If we can't defeat the church, he then thought, will Neverwinter continue to run under the current order? Will the kingdom be completely devoured by the church, or will it return to the previous path of the noble ownership? And what about Anna and the rest of the witches? Can they really safely flee to Sleeping Islands? He had devoted to forging the land and developed a strong feeling towards the people unconsciously. "Don't worry," Nightingale held onto his hand and softly said. "As I mentioned before, you won't be hurt as long as I'm still alive." She paused and said, "Not to mention that our story has just started." Chapter 622, The Flames of Thunder. Roland had just come to the command post with his breakfast when he received Maggie's report in the next morning. "The church is on the way, Coo." Her nervous voice could be heard from the magic stone. "A team has left Coldwind Ridge and it's moving forward to the defense line, Coo." "How many of them?" 1, 2, 3, 5 of them in total." Roland, who was preparing for the frontline battle conference, sat back down and said, "What? 5? They're dressed in shimmery armors, holding the holy city's flag up high. What a show-off, Coo. Do I need to report to the cannon markers?" No, you just continue to keep an eye on what Coldwind Ridge will do." Roland put the bread into his mouth, wondering, what's the church thinking? They're probably coming to beg for mercy? Nightingale twitched her lips and said, "If this is the case, the church shouldn't send the army to invade Coldwind Ridge." Roland frowned. 1.5 days later, the platoon reached the front line of defense. The priest who led the troop claimed that they were the emissary delegation sent by the church to meet with Roland, His Majesty. At the same time, there was a handwritten letter from Supreme Pontiff for the young king of Kingdom of Grey Castle. What do you think? Roland gathered the advisor department and the witches, and asked, could it be a trick of the pure witches? I'd like to ask for your thought before this, Edith spoke. Will you accept their peace negotiation if the church wants to surrender? Roland rejected the possibility without any hesitation, unless they dismiss the God's punishment army and bring all the senior management and those who kill the innocent to trial. However, I don't think the church will accept this term. Indeed, Edith instantly answered, in this case, you shouldn't meet the emissary delegation. Not to mention if there's any conspiracy, the negotiation process may affect your determination. I agree with you. Agatha nodded. Even though there's no magic reaction on 5 of them, but the witch's ability is very strange, no one can be sure what's going to happen next. Perhaps we should just capture them for interrogation and get rid of them secretly after we know the actual purpose of them coming here. Iron Axe made a cutthroat gesture and said. Your Majesty, Kingdom of Grey Castle isn't Iron Sand City, Sir Eltec quickly advised. It's better not to do so, it's going to ruin your reputation when the news spread. I know. Roland contemplated for a while and looked at Iron Axe. Get them to leave the letter and send them off. Yes, Your Majesty. Roland could not help but wonder. What would the supreme ruler of Hermes say? Is that going to be an advice or an inducement? After several inspections by Sylvie and Agatha, the handwritten letter by the Pope of Holy City had finally reached Roland. Opening up the exquisite cover, the handwriting on the letter was surprisingly graceful. And the content of the letter surprised Roland. He described the origins and purpose of the church in an honest note and revealed the existence of the great enemy of mankind, the demon. If he did not know the 400-years-old secret before this, the content was probably enough to make him confused and inconceivable. Is this the strategy of the enemy? Confusing the opponent with the dust-laden history truth and taking it as the sincerity for peace negotiation? As a result, after the first platoon returned, Coldwind Ridge sent another platoon of soldiers. And there were also 5 of them. Of course, Roland did not meet up with them as well but asked them to simply leave the letter behind instead. The content of the letter was more in-depth this time, and it had mentioned the Battle of Divine Will other than the brief introduction of the Union before the Church was formed. The Pope believed that the 400-year cycle battle of the different races was a deity's test towards the mankind. Roland was contemptuous towards this idea, but he could feel a slight uneasiness in his heart. Coldwind Ridge had continuously delegated several emissary delegation troops to send a few handwritten letters by Pope to the frontline battalion within a week time after that. The letters did not reveal too much new information, and the content was getting shorter and shorter. Roland simply turned a blind eye to the suggestion to combine the efforts from both sides to confront the demon which was written behind the letter. The church only stopped sending any new messenger when the hot summer days arrived. The enemy had come in full force this time. This is lightning, the enemy has entered the 9th zone. Repeat, the enemy has entered the 9th zone. Hearing the voice that came out from the sigil, Cat's Claw nervously flipped through the booklet in his hand. 9th. Quick! Rodney shouted, the shell is already installed. It's already at the fastest speed. Cat's Claw shouted, It's here, angle 26, pitch 15. Nelson quickly swung the handle. 26. 15, complete. Ready to shoot. Cat's Claw quickly covered his ears upon hearing the order. Fire. Job quickly pulled the matchlock. The 152 centimeters long song cannon instantly issued a stirring roar, the sound wave mixed with the air flow blowing in the face. It was like a hammer beating on the chest of the Cat's Claw, making his blood boil. He could feel the ground below his feet started to tremble under the activation of the huge recoil. This is power, Cat's Claw thought to himself. Long song cannon is the weapon that's more suitable for the men to operate, comparing to the 12-pound small metal pipe. The only regret was that he was not able to see the scene when the shell landed. Acting boldly, Cat's Claw came close to the magic stone in Leaf's hand and said, Miss Lightning, did we hit the target? Aha! Nicely hit, the little girl replied. Comparing to the rear cannon operator, Lightning and Maggie could observe the enemy's movements and strikes taken more directly. Lightning was floating at an absolute safe height and looking down with the telescope in her hand. She realized that the howitzer launched just now fell on the west area of the 9th zone, about 4 meters deviated from the estimated falling point. It was probably due to the change of wind. However, the actual effect was not too bad. The mighty army of the church had filled the entire mountain path. Given that, a scarlet flower would instantly blossom as long as the shell fell on top of the army. It was just like the previous hit. She could not see the entire process of the flight of the shell until the landing. The first thing that came into her eyes was the dark red light, following by the highly sprung dust and gravel and a fleeting ripple spreading from the light, leaving a trail of dust. The sound of the explosion would not be heard until a while later, as if both did not happen at the same time. When the smoke was blown away, the shell's point of fall was left with a burned black mark, and around it was a hideous mess of dead bodies. The residual limbs could be seen everywhere, and the sticky blood and organs had dyed the shiny armors with a touch of bright red color. The Judgment warriors at a further distance looked totally different, and there were no obvious wounds on their bodies, but they were still spitting out blood and fell on the floor. Some of them could still walk for a few meters before falling, and the crooked way they walked made them look as if they were drunk. Only one shelling could cause the church to lose nearly 50 men. Lightning was waving her fist happily and said, "You deserve it." And she shifted her gaze to the next shelling zone. "Attention, the enemy is passing through the 12th zone, please fire, repeat, please fire." Chapter 623, Battle to the Death. Under the artillery bombardment, the church disorganized and gradually separated, while the God's punishment warriors, who were unaffected, hastened their advance and left the Judgment army behind. Suddenly, Lightning noticed a strange scene. A rider dressed as a priest, shining with yellow light, quickly traversed the rugged hill road from behind and stabilized the scattered army again. The army proceeded along with the rider's guidance. This time, instead of being lined up in orderly rows, they were dispersed so that the later grenades failed to achieve the first significant results. That was a pure witch. She was preparing to arrange 2 cannons to attack the area where the pure witch of the church would soon pass, when she heard Maggie screaming. "Careful!" Lightning suddenly pulled her figure more than 10 meters upward, before a swarm of locusts passed beneath her feet like a brown cloud. After failing to attack, they twisted together to form the vague appearance of a man. "Rotten bastards, how dare you to go against the church? Go to hell. Maggie, continue to guide the cannons." Lightning pulled down the windbreak, pointed a pistol at the swarm and said, "Killing compatriots make you feel so glorious? Go die." Enemies entered Danny's vision. This time they had many more warriors than previously. The misty mountains were covered by the sheen of armors. The God's punishment warriors did not use the tactic of a slow forward covered by shields, but rather charged right from the beginning. Looking at the ocean of rushing enemies, he could feel their great momentum. His sweaty palms made his gun sticky. He had only seen this scene on the wall when the months of demons came, thousands of demonic beasts, regardless of death, insanely charged at the walls. Anything in their way would be ruthlessly torn apart. But now, the first army was facing enemies more powerful than the demonic beasts. But Danny did not fear it. The demonic beasts could not break that low stone wall that the militia was fighting atop of, and now the core of the church would be barricaded by the first army's defense in flesh. What was more, the woman he wanted to protect was just behind their position. When Danny stepped into the trenches in the morning, he saw a familiar figure in green that turned around and smiled at him. Despite knowing that it was out of courtesy, that smiling face was still like a blooming flower bud rooted in his heart. He had never thought that she would come with Roland to this battleground. Anyway, he would not allow the enemy to break through the line of defense. It was a pity that Lord Iron Axe expelled him from the precision shooting team after he violated military discipline. If his weapon had not been replaced with a revolving rifle, or he would have taught the God's punishment army a lesson. They just crossed the 300-meter line. Malt reported the distance of the enemies. "Spear throwers. I see it." Danny patted the little man on the head. "Take care of yourself." Malt, who was the victim of his own actions, after his injuries had healed, was demoted back down to normal flintlocks. However, since he was an accomplice, rather than confinement, the commander-in-chief was lenient and only docked him a month's salary. The truth was that this time the enemy's offensive charge was so rapid that 4 machine gun forts failed to completely suppress the God's Punishment Army. As dust in the wake of the God's Punishment Army and smoke from the field artilleries filled the air, several loopholes in the interlaced fire network appeared. The God's Punishment Army soldiers that rushed ahead crossed the musketeers' red warning line. 200-meter line, throwing spear. Lie down. Lie yourself down. Continuous cries came from the trenches. Danny shot all 5 bullets in a round at a stretch and then fell down to the ground. At the same time, he reloaded the gun. After the attack of the spears, he got up and pulled the trigger, firing toward the nearest enemy. At that distance, revolving rifles were as powerful as the new weapons. Danny could almost see the stony faces of the God's Punishment warriors, which looked as if the surrounding artillery and gunfire had nothing to do with them. Until a bullet penetrated the God's Punishment warrior's chest and neck and blew his head, did he tremble to stop and spray the blue blood. As more and more enemies crossed the line of fire, Danny quickly used up 3 preloaded cartridges. According to the predetermined plan, he quickly brought a gun to the second trench. Just as he got into the trench and saw his teammates, a black shadow fell from the sky. Suddenly a God's Punishment warrior jumped up and crossed the barbed wire in front of the trench, waving a big sword to split him apart. "Run!" He caught Malt behind him and pulled him to his bosom. There was a loud noise. Danny suddenly felt that his hand was numb and fell down. When he opened his eyes, Malt, who was in his arms, was cut off at the waist. Malt watched him, with his mouth open. He spat blood but could not speak anymore. Danny felt a buzz in his brain and shouted, but the God's Punishment warrior had already rushed over him. Danny's arms were sliced off and his face was nearly split by the God's Punishment warriors. Suddenly Danny could even see the rough blade, stained with his blood. Just as he thought he was going to die, another cold light flashed in his eyes. The 2 swords burst into flame and the God's Punishment warrior's weapon was dropped to the ground. A woman with a long black ponytail that hung down to her waist and eyes flashing with a golden light appeared above the tunnel like an insurmountable mountain. The God's Punishment warrior that lost his swords did not flinch at all and punched 2 at her. In an instant, he fell to the ground dead. Without any resistance, his head was crushed. The blue-white mixture splashed on Danny's face. "Let's go." She glanced at the frightened soldiers and spat out her words coldly before engaging the other 2 God's Punishment warriors that had rushed over. "This guy is hurt. Get him out of here." With Malt, Danny said in a hoarse voice, hugging the little man in what was left of his arms. "He's dead." Someone shouted. "Do you want to kill us all?" The teammates behind him grabbed his severed arms and pulled him towards the back of the trench as the lifeless Malt gradually disappeared from Danny's vision. Lightning flew to the back of the swarm at full speed and pulled the trigger. She had figured out the details of the enemy. Killing every insect in the swarm would be an arduous task, and the Pure Witch had already lost some magic, especially given that Maggie metamorphosed into the natural enemy of the locusts, a swallow. Maggie kept hurting the swarm over and forced it into a ball before pulling out a pistol shooting it. Finally a vicious curse and then a roar entered her ears. The Pure Witch could not survive for too long. When Lightning was about to withdraw and reload, the locusts suddenly turned around and rushed toward the ground. "Maggie!" cried the little girl. "Oh!" Goshawk folded her eagle wings and swooped down to the swarm below with her ferocious mouth. "What's this?" "It's impossible." The sound of the locusts turned into a cry. It wanted to turn around to escape, but it was too late. Maggie swallowed the swarm effortlessly and chewed twice. "Terrible." Lightning shrugged and stuck her pistol in her belt. "Because they aren't roasted or seasoned." Until then, she had not noticed that there were more bloodstains on her body. During the first explorations, she came into contact with the swarm several times, and the teeth of these locusts were like hard rasps. If they were ordinary people, maybe they would not easily avoid this flexible attack. Looking at the camp covered with craters and corpses, Lightning took a deep breath. We don't need artillery guidance here. Let's support His Majesty. Ah. Chapter 624, Devastation. This is an absolute slaughter. Nail thought, sitting on the top of the tower, hands on his machine gun grip. As long as the trigger was depressed, this steel weapon would keep spouting out the flames and shoot bullets toward the enemies. The position targeted by this weapon would be covered by the death of the network, where all lives would become fragmented like fallen bowls from the table. Being able to dominate the battlefield from such a high position left him feeling passionate. So did his comrades and his team. The 66th. Look, that poor guy has been disintegrated. What are you counting? That's obviously the 68th. Look over there, a guy is still rolling on the ground. Just kill him. His intestines have already spilled out, save your ammunition and let him slowly struggle. With a click, the fabric tape slipped down and another box of bullets had come to its end. Cover the third trench. I'm going to reload. Nail cried to a machine gun team in the tower. Don't worry, and just leave it to us. His teammates quickly brought over a box full of bullets. He put on a single thick glove and gripped the smoking barrel of the machine gun with a special caliper. He held the pipe with one hand, disassembled it easily, and placed it lightly in the open space. According to the requirements of training, soldiers could not fire continuously except under extraordinary conditions. So the barrel must be replaced after a box of bullets was shot to avoid barrel deformation with overheating. It was said that this kind of black steel pipe, which could fit the thread of the gun chamber perfectly, was made by the witch, Miss Anna. Every pipe cost about 50 gold royals, which made the team members treat their guns like their children. After they installed the cooled barrels, the jarring percussive sound once again rang out from the tower. Look, there's a witch in the east of the first trench. Suddenly a cry rang out around him. That's not a witch, idiot. That's a pure witch, Miss Nana's enemies. Nail also saw the target his teammate pointed out. The woman in a red robe might have been hit on the leg by a flying bullet. She was on the ground and slowly crawling forward. The robe behind her dragged a light blood stain. He aimed the gun at the pure witch, but a feeling left him feeling a little overwhelmed, and he did not pull the trigger. From her figure, she looked as though she may have not yet grown up. Shoot, what are you waiting for? A string of sand quickly swept over her body the moment he hesitated. She stopped struggling and blood spread from her belly, like a small red flower. Hell, we just lost a result. Stop saying that. Another one interrupted him while patting Nail on the shoulder. You're tired, leave it to me. He took a deep breath and said, No, I'm fine. Nail recomposed himself. This was a war with the church. Regardless of age, the enemy was the enemy, and they were still not strong enough. Nail secretly clenched his teeth and left his compassion behind him. Wait, what happened in the middle of the third trench? The observer in another team suddenly exclaimed. The ground collapsed? My God, what's that? Damn, pure witches. More than one, just kill them. Nail quickly turned the gun and saw a square pit suddenly appear in the middle of the third trench. Its walls were flat as though they had been cut by a knife. A woman in a black veil jumped out of the trench and stood straight with her hands behind her back. When he fired, he faintly heard a sharp sound of wind. The moment he turned his head, the butt of a rifle hit him in the face. Nail suddenly felt everything go black and fell to the ground. Before losing consciousness, the last scene he saw was that his teammate raised a rifle toward him. Roland stood on the command platform with a telescope, watching the defense line where the situation gradually became clear. Some of the enemies had crossed the first 3 trenches and were making their way to the fourth. However, soldiers retreating from the front line made the subsequent defensive firepower more and more concentrated. Under the continuous fire of 2 machine guns that were occupying the high spot on the towers, the God's punishment army's offensive momentum obviously showed a decline. By such a trend, they were not likely to make it to the remaining 5 trenches and artillery positions. The fire on the ground was too fierce and many church corps had been bogged down into a trench. The First Army would inevitably set up a blocking point at each exit of all longitudinal grooves. The advancing speed of the enemy would be drastically reduced and the speed advantage of the God's punishment army would no longer be obvious. At this moment, the Judgment Army gradually stepped onto the battlefield. This army suffered heavy losses under the attack of the Longsong cannon, but had not yet been totally routed, which this was out of Roland's expectations. It was due to the pills of madness that made the soldiers berserk. But compared with that of the God's punishment army, their threat was clearly much lower. The pills of madness could not make people immune to fear. When the Judgment Army soldiers were subjected to the double attack of field artillery and machine guns, the will of gods could not save them. In fact, the greatest contributor to this battle was the bunkers on both sides and the 8 Mark I type heavy machine guns in the tower. In order to ensure that they could fire continuously, not only did they need enough bullets but each team was equipped with nearly 10 barrels. The only problem was that in order to employ this strategy, they had emptied their reserve of bullets. Of course, it was extremely economical to eliminate all the main forces of the church here. During this time, Sylvie sometimes observed their magic reaction. But those pure witches had not played a significant role in the war. They followed the God's punishment army marching forward, but soon disappeared into smoke and artillery fire. The outcome had been set. Church of Hermes would soon become the dust of history. Just as Roland thought that, suddenly there was an emergency. Pure witches ahead of us. Sylvie, who also stood on the high platform, warned. 4, no, 5. The surface of the 3rd trench suddenly rose, as if something was lifted up, and then it quickly fell down, pulling the surrounding barbed wire and stakes together into the ground. A woman in black veil appeared in the collapsed position. She did not take any action, she just looked straight forward. A strange scene then occurred. Numerous soldiers in the trenches turned their guns, aimed at their chin and then pulled the trigger. A mass of mist burst from the trenches like a red fountain. 4 machine guns forts misfired at the same time. Soldiers who were not affected shot her as if they just woke up. Suddenly there were several shots in her body and she fell into the pit on her back. Seizing this chance, the Judgment Army, under the effect of the pills of madness, rushed toward the defense line. Chapter 625, The Decisive Battle. Lady Zero, Margie appears to be worn out. Vanilla turned around and said with an anxious look. Hold on. Zero watched overhead with a grim expression. Although she was underground, she found a beam of light shone on the dome. The God's punishment army was moving forwards along the rampant trenches, encroaching on the enemy's position gradually. They, obviously, progressed slower and slower. They could only choose to attack in a roundabout manner as each strategic pass was heavily guarded. Therefore, they would be inevitably shot down by the snow powder weapons while throwing the spears. The gap between trenches could only be filled with the bodies of the soldiers, and the blue blood overflowed in the pit bottom. It was even harder to march atop the ground. Although the God's punishment warriors could leap over the wire entanglements which could not be destroyed, they would be likely exposed to the enemy's firepower. The flame was blazing all the way, in particular, in 4 towers in the rear of the defensive lines, which blazed as if it would kill people at any time. The 3rd trench would probably be the ultimate limit that the God's punishment warriors could march to. Damn it! She did not ever expect that things would actually come to such a deadlock. She thought that she had prepared well for the arrival of this day. Such as locating the accurate position of where Roland Wimbledon was. The mission of the messengers was nothing more than a pretext to meet Roland, but it did not matter if they did not meet him. The letter written in the name of the Pope revealed the secrets of the Church and the battle of divine will. People would not take it seriously when hearing such impossible information, but it would be much more convincing if the letter was written in the name of the Pope. Besides, what she wrote was true. Roland could still not make out her real intentions from the letter, even though he had witches skilled at handwriting recognition. A special powder was daubed on the letter. It was an alchemic product developed by pivotal secret authority that emitted a smell that ordinary people could not detect. Each time a person touched the letter, the smell would accumulate and be imbibed into the skin, making it hard to remove, even with water. Zero firmly believed that the letter would be delivered to Roland, as no rulers would not be interested in these kinds of shocking secrets. Other people had no chances to read the letter, and so in this case, Roland would have the strongest smell on his body. Although there were no differences between Roland and other people, Vanilla could easily sniff it out by virtue of the smell. Vanilla could sniff out various unimaginable smells when she cast her ability. In her opinion, bloodstains after a month would still emit a faint stench, and there would be a strange odor on furs when animals were in the rut. At the moment, Roland was just 1,000 steps away from them. Zero even took all costs to use the God's Punishment Army and Judgment Army to divert the attention of the Grey Castle's defensive line. Some pure witches of less importance even became the sacrificial lambs in consideration that there were witches who might perceive magic power in Roland's camp. However, she, the evil backstage, was hiding underground and moving between the rocks by means of Margie's magic arc. Blackveil was the real game-changer to win this war. As one of 3 pure witches of the highest rank in Holy City, valued by His Holiness O'Brien, her ability was extremely terrible for common people who had no defensive abilities. The people that had seen her would feel the inner feeling of dread when she was young. Her power was further strengthened when she was in adulthood. The strong sense of fear would occupy people's minds as long as they saw her eyes, and thus they would kill themselves or hurt people around due to their maniac surmises. At the same time, the derivative ability was also powerful after Blackveil's awakening. The simple eye-to-eye contact could cause not only fear but also unclear illusions. Although her ability could only impact one person at a time, it would also play a vital role at a critical juncture. That was also why Archbishop Tayfun did not doubt the Pope's orders. At the gaze of the eyes of death, Zero took it for granted that Roland's troops would be defeated instantly. Everything seemed to go smoothly, and Zero did not realize that she had the wrong idea until the war begun. She did not expect that she had still underestimated the power of snow powder weapons. Dense smoke and fire enveloped the mountain pass. With the help of snow powder weapons, Roland launched attacks from 5 kilometers away, and the troops of the church were heavily hit before touching the defensive lines. She changed the battle tactics at once to attack the position but found that the God's Punishment Army was also in difficulty. The seemingly shallow trenches were much harder to seize than the towering walls. The warriors wrested the transverse trenches from the flying bullets. However, they had never expected that the enemies did not care about the loss of the battle line and just retreated in order. They left the pass to the God's Punishment Army that had suffered a heavy cost and then continued to intercept them, relying on the following passes. During this period of time, Zero even saw an extraordinary witch. Margie's magic arc could not be operated all the way to her target as her magic power had declined along with the combat capability of the God's Punishment Army. However, the current situation was still a far cry from her expectation. Isabella perceived that less than half of enemies were wearing God stones. Under such circumstances, she had to gather them together if she wanted more people to see her. The God's Punishment Army was now marching forwards to the 3rd entrenchment, and the enemies were too sparse in the rest of entrenchments. Once Blackveil was exposed to the enemies, she could only have a limited time to cast her power. How many enemies would notice her in an instant? She would be hit by the snow powder weapon before they came back to their minds. Your Holiness, the Ark will be torn apart soon. Huge sweat had emerged from Margie's face, her voice slightly trembling. Obviously, the excessive use of her magic power was a heavy burden on her. At the same time, there were cracks in the walls and the dome became dim. Zero realized that she had to make a choice. Or rather, she had no other choice at all. Go up. Take action as scheduled. Margie took a breath and started to operate the arc to draw close to the ground. In a second the arc rushed out of the earth's surface, her magic power dissipated at once. A pungent smoke taste, boring and continuous roars along with a bloody smell, suddenly filled all around. Blackveil turned around and glanced at Zero profoundly, and then leaped over the square-shaped pit left by the ark. Foreseeably, it was the last time that she would serve the church. The battlefield quietened down unexpectedly as if an invisible giant hand nipped people's throats. "Isabella! Start using infinite!" Zero ordered. After several ringing peals, a bunch of bloody flowers appeared on the back of Black Veil, and then she dropped down into the pit like a rootless fallen leaf. Grinding her teeth, Isabella took the sigil in her hands. The black and bright magic stone turned dark and gloomy at once as if it absorbed the sunshine around. Under the function of infinite, an invisible ripple spread out and extended all over the battlefield. The amplitude of the fluctuation of the ripple was exactly the same as the god stone Roland wore, but in an opposite direction. Under the influence of the ripple, the black hole formed by the god stone of premium quality vanished into the air. Almost at the same time, Zero magically changed into a beam of light and flew towards the king of the kingdom of Grey Castle 1,000 steps afar. In a second, flying out of the pit, she overlooked the whole battlefield from the sky. There were hundreds of soldiers, who were also common people, lying down in the trenches. Looks of shock and panic on their faces. The extraordinary was galloping fast, while the Judgment Army was charging forward. Everything seemed to come to a standstill until the lethal fire on the tower appeared again. And the whole battlefield returned to its normality. The yell of fighting, howls, and explosive sounds mixed together, forming a thrilling ode. She saw the prince with gray hair and felt the smiles from God upon her as she got closer and closer to the platform. Nightingale witnessed the quirky change. In the misty world of white and black colors, the magic power of the beam of light was extremely expressive, like a mass of blurry cyclones coming towards the rear of their position at a tremendous speed. She knew that it was the last and the most critical strike that the Pure Witch had launched. "Protect His Majesty." Shavi stretched her hands to prop up a wide magic barrier, large enough to cover the whole platform. Andrea summoned the magical longbow to shoot at the beam of light with arrows of light, bright as the sun. In a bid to withdraw, Nightingale grabbed Roland, who had lost the protection of the god stone as she had realized that the beam of light was targeted at His Majesty, Roland. But it indeed moved too fast. Instantly, the beam of light passed through the arrow of light and the magic barrier and easily caught up with Nightingale and Roland. Even the mist could not block its tracking. Nightingale pushed Roland away without any hesitations and turned around to crash straight into the beam of light. However, all of her efforts did not work. It all happened in a split second. The beam of light pierced through her body and went into the body of Roland. "No!" Nightingale cried out, heartbroken. With his eyes widened, Roland's body shook hopelessly and fell backward feebly. Chapter 626, Battle of Fate. Was everything a dream? Roland blinked his eyes as he walked step by step to the fence in order to look down at the school's panorama against the sunset. No one was in the spacious playground. Under the orange sunset, the goal looked lonely and its very long shadow was reflected on the ground. Far away were the familiar library and dormitory, and the sunset painted the luminous windows with a ray of gold. Roland had studied here for almost 7 years, so that he had been familiar with everything. He knew that he was standing on the rooftop of a teaching building and that this was his favorite place to spend his spare time. Roland had many memories here, such as that iron gate behind him that was driven by the warm wind to open and close constantly. This iron gate was billed as a unique view of the teaching building's rooftop, and its cover looked as ancient as a cultural relic excavated by archaeologists. When he had come to this school, the gate had already been torn and tattered. As long as it was pushed lightly, it would make noise continuously as if it were out of breath. Yet it was extremely quiet after it was opened and then closed. As far as Roland was concerned, the gate would fall apart soon, but still, at the time of his graduation, it stood still on the rooftop. But since this was a dream, why did I look the same as Prince Roland, thought Roland. Roland lowered his head to see his slender hands, and then touched his gray hair on his shoulders. Apparently, the height and shape were different from what they were when he indulged himself in his studies. So, what had happened, thought Roland. Roland frowned. After a while he remembered that the last scene he had seen was that Nightingale had pushed him away, and then after a flash, he had only seen her panicking and despairing face. "Who on earth are you?" A tactful and intangible female voice suddenly appeared beside him. Roland was scared and abruptly turned around only to find that a lady with long white hair was walking toward him. She had a pair of ruby-like eyes and her red and white robe dropped down to the ground with a golden pattern embroidered on its bottom, which obviously did not belong to this era. Besides, the golden throne of her head showed her identity. "You're a pure witch of the church." "Yes. But I'm also the 15th Pope of Holy City of Hermes." She paused and continued to say, "I'm Zero, while you're definitely not Roland Wimbledon." "Well," Roland frowned and said, "so did you create this place?" Everything made sense. The flash should be Zero's ability that Nightingale had wanted to help him to escape from. And the scenery before him should be an illusion or a virtual space, something like that. The moment he opened his eyes, Roland thought that he had come back to the modern world again. Even though Roland knew that perhaps the church was originally the Union, it never occurred to him that the Pope was a pure witch. Therefore, it was so incredible to see that these witches boldly turned other witches into inhumane monsters. "No, you created this place." Zero walked toward him step by step and said in an exciting tone, "The place is hidden deeply in your memories and appears frequently in most of your daily life. But I'm curious as to where this is. We both know that Prince Roland of the Grey Castle would have never lived in such a place. Why should I tell you?" Roland moved to the other side of the fence and kept a distance from her. What could he do to shake off the illusion? Roland thought of many ideas in his mind. Maybe he could jump off here? Based on his experiences of nightmares, he would instantly wake up from a nightmare if he jumped off of a high place. Zero smiled and said in a sweet tone, "It's okay that you won't tell me. I'll spend a little of time finally figuring out that who you're, where you're from and why you've become Prince Roland." Would she finally find out? "You mean to tell me that you'll read my memories?" Roland asked in a very cold tone. "Don't flatter yourself." Zero suddenly stopped and said, "You know what? I would explain to each one trapped in the illusion the effects, rules, and the impact of my ability. Everyone except for you." "What?" The moment Roland asked, he found that Zero had appeared in front of him. And a sudden pain made him lose his hearing. Roland trembled and lowered his head to only find that a knife was inserted into his chest. Roland wanted to shout, but he could not make any sound. His chest was destroyed completely and the opening and closing of his thoracic cavity could not squeeze even a little air into his throat. Just like an electrical current, the strong pain spread over his body. Roland would rather die immediately than suffer one more second. "Because I don't like anything that's confusing." At the other end of the knife was Zero's calm face. Half of her body was splashed and wet by Roland's gushing blood. Due to hypoxia and the self-protective syncope of his brain, he quickly became unconscious. But the next second, Roland stood still beside the fence, his body intact. In addition, Zero also stood far away from him, like she had never left that spot. What had happened? Roland took deep breaths. Was it just an illusion? He covered his chest that was moving up and down fiercely, and the wound still hurt. Looking down, he saw the shape of a pool of blood. Damn, what had happened just now was true, thought Roland. Staring at the knife held by Zero, Roland was quite surprised in his heart because there had been nothing in her hand before. Could she create something out of nothing? Just at the moment, Zero rushed toward him again. She was so quick that Roland could not see her clearly. Roland instantly turned around to escape, but just after a step, he felt a pain in his abdomen. Then, Roland experienced death again. Zero wielded her long knife to cut him into two halves. The pain this time lasted longer than last time and he fell down into his own blood and outflowing guts. The lasting pain made him shout so miserably that even he was frightened by his own voice. After his second resurrection, Roland had realized something. This is a nightmare that can't be broken by jumping off of a high place or from feeling fierce pain. It's like a cyclical arena. Damn it. What are conditions of escaping from this? What about defeating the white-haired witch in front me? Zero can create weapons out of nothing, but what about me? Roland gritted his teeth and started to concentrate his spirit. If I had had a shield, I would be able to fight against her. A blue light flashed. A transparent anti-explosive shield appeared in Roland's hand. He had stopped her attack, but there was a deep scar left on the shield. What was worse, Roland was blown away by the huge clash. Well, this was what had happened. Roland said a dirty word in his heart. When rolling over, Roland dropped the shield and manifested an automatic rifle. When Roland raised the rifle to shoot, Zero disappeared. What was going on, thought Roland. I'm right here. Her voice emerged next to his ears. After a white light flashed, his arms dropped to the ground, so did the rifle. Chapter 627, The Intertwined Battle of Fate, 2. I must admit that I'm surprised by your ability to comprehend, Zero walked to him and said while squatting down, you're the first one who can comprehend this and counterattack without being given any explanation. The Pure Witch picked up the rifle on the ground, carefully explored it for a moment and said, rare materials, exquisite processing techniques. Is this a snow powder weapon as well? The items you created are really scary, however, they do not pose much threat to me. I've been watching the entire battle closely. Most of the slender tubes in the tunnel and the thick iron tubes behind the camp rely on the operators, and you could not even see my movements. She shook her head and said, it's impossible for you to defeat me. I've devoured over 1,000 warriors and even an extraordinary over the years. Suddenly, a green plastic box appeared between them. A loud explosion suddenly rang through the roof. The glass in the classroom crunched and even the entire floor of the building was blown up with a hole in it. The air current swept the old iron stairwell door to the ground. It's not because I have a strong ability to comprehend, but your stage setting is too lousy. Roland reappeared in the corner of the rooftop. He was gasping for air as the sharp pain was still fresh in his memory. He could now understand the feeling of those who were amputated before they died. He made an explosive to bomb both Zero and himself into pieces at the same time as he could not tolerate it anymore. Lousy? Zero, who was newly born, raised her eyebrows and said, it's in your memory. However, it's created through your ability. It's 6 o'clock in the evening, the busiest time on the campus. How is it possible that there's no one on the field? It seems exquisite, but it's just a setting full of loopholes. He was thinking of a countermeasure while delaying for time. Is this the way you devour your opponent? Force them into despair so that they'll give up and obediently dedicate their knowledge and skills to you? The skills of the Pure Witch were somewhat similar to the extraordinary, or at least Roland had only seen such power and speed on Ashes. The Pure Witch could only be hurt by powerful explosives from which he could not escape either, as it was difficult to hit her with only a normal firearm. However, was it really that simple? After 3 resurrections, Roland could already feel his sweaty back. His heart was pounding faster than before, as if he just ran around the field, and he was physically weaker. Perhaps the number of the resurrections was limited. In this case, it was not a good idea to bomb an entire building with high explosives. The score was already 3-1 now, and he must quickly regain the position. There was no doubt that what he needed was a weapon that could both attack and defend. Although I don't quite understand what you're talking about, however, isn't it good to surrender? Zero said with her head tilted to one side, it's a wise choice even if it means that you have to give up, as death is a torture to anyone. You can keep those words to yourself. Roland loudly shouted. Iron Man. A red metal armor suddenly appeared in front of him and he quietly recited, start the program, in his heart after walking into the armor from behind. A narrow display screen appeared at the front of the helmet, however, the armor did not close up by itself and no artificial intelligence responded to his command. The armor fell to the ground straight away, even before he managed to move forward. Zero's blade had already cut into Roland's neck when he got up. The entire world suddenly turned upside down and he could see his body helplessly kneeling down before he passed out. You should at least give it some joints if you're trying to create a plate armor, the Pure Witch knocked on the empty armor and said, however, I don't think that a hollow and thin iron sheet has much effect. Roland's heart quickly sank after his 4th resurrection. Although the death was not painful, Roland had realized a harsh truth: the thing he created without understanding its principle was just an empty shell. For example, the display screen on the helmet was simply a camera. Damn, I can only use the stupid method now. While Zero was still pondering on the metal armor, a few pieces of steel plates as thick as 10 centimeters appeared out of nowhere and fell beside him, forming into a blockhouse that could hide only one person. A protected weapon control station rose on the top of the blockhouse, and it was carrying 40mm grenade machine gun. Roland quickly plunged into it and locked the entrance while controlling the weapon station to fire at the pure witch. This attempt had finally worked. Zero could not avoid the destruction scope of the grenade machine gun even when she approached the blockhouse again. Roland continuously shot the grenades around the blockhouse, and the flying fragments had pierced through her body while making a banging noise as they hit the thick steel plate. Unfortunately, Roland was unable to find Zero's resurrection position at once, and she had quickly retracted to hide in the corner of the stairwell to avoid the explosive grenade that was coming towards her. A radiant splendor appeared in the darkening sky when he was just about to create another weapon. A golden light was swirling above the clouds, and the dazzling tassels had replaced the sunset which was cast into the shade. The scene was familiar to him. Suddenly, a myriad of golden thunder fell on top of the building and Roland was instantly engulfed. After the fifth death, Roland was drenched in cold sweat as if he just came out of the water, and his calves and arms were uncontrollably twitching. The blockhouse was completely melted by the sigil of God's will. However, it had not caused much damage to the ground other than the ground was charred. The unreasonable magic power was still working in this battle. Just give up. Unexpectedly, Zero did not closely pursue. Your energy has already reached the limit. Any additional battle is meaningless as you'll not get anything other than endless pain. Roland clenched his teeth and strongly held on to himself. Why does she keep asking me to surrender when she can obviously win this battle if she continues to pursue and attack? Is the output going to be different for her if I surrender myself instead of being killed after exhaustion? You should now understand that both creation and death consume energy. The exhaustion of energy means failure. Everyone has a different energy level, and it's beyond my expectation that you can last until now. She stretched out her arms and said, by the way, I have over 200 years of experience. That will be doubled if it includes the time I spent in the soul battle. In other words, my energy is enough to endure hundreds of deaths, and your efforts will only make you more desperate. Hundreds. Is it a boast or the truth? However, Roland felt that Zero was not lying as she looked relaxed. And Roland did not have much energy left to consume. Chapter 628, The Intertwined Battle of Fate. 3. Roland's experience from dying 5 times led him to realize that the biggest difference between the two lies in them themselves. The powerful weapons could easily affect himself, and the fixed bunker would become the target of the sigil of God's will. Not to mention, in all likelihood, Zero knew the recipe for snow powder. If she became desperate to perish with him or the roof directly collapsed, he was not confident of the outcome as he did not have many lives to consume. He would lose this battle for sure if he could not control the pure witch. What should I do now? Thought Roland. A cage? An oriented mine? A power grid? A laser fence? Roland had rejected all the answers that were constantly appearing in his mind, as none of them could really confine Zero. The position after death could not be defined as it could be at the original spot or any corner of the roof. His energy had obviously hit bottom, and constantly creating consumables was just wasting his remaining resurrections. The next failure might be his real death. I have to deprive her of her mobility. And I have to also keep the roof intact. I have to also kill her hundreds of times in a shot. Is it possible? Roland took a deep breath and asked, during these 200 years, how many times have you fought such a battle? Over 1,000 times or more, however, only a few that really impressed me, Zero answered. They had a stronger will than you do, however, they were still defeated by the endless deaths. There are only a few people who'll choose to continue being tortured while facing a hopeless ending. She paused and said, are you still going to stick to your previous approach? I indeed don't have much hope, however, I simply want to fulfill my curiosity before everything comes to an end. You've never failed in over 1,000 battles? I would not be standing here if I failed. How come? Roland slowly sat down to save the little energy he had left. Did no one think of creating lava or a deep sea to defeat you before you attained such great power? This isn't a new idea, but unfortunately, no one can do it. Zero walked in front of him. Just changing the place that we're standing in consumes no lesser energy than death. Changing the world is just a delusion and only God can do it. There's no God in my world, he said lamentably. So, have you decided to give up? The pure witch Zero bent down to lift up his chin and she said, in this case, submit to me and follow me. Sorry. Roland smiled while holding on to both her shoulders and gently pushed her away. I still want to try again. Zero arose and pulled out her weapon, however, she found that the distance between both of them was constantly growing larger. Her expression quickly changed as she realized that she was unable to move any closer to Roland. Her body was still sliding backward even when she was running at full speed. Zero looked down and noticed that the floor beneath her feet had become as smooth as a mirror without her knowing. However, she would not slip even if the ground was so smooth, which was contrary to her common sense. Her body remained relatively still as if it was nailed to the ground regardless of what she was doing. Your amazing mobility doesn't seem to work anymore, Roland said, even a monster like you can't move a step closer without the support of friction. What did you do? Zero bent down and tried to slow down or change the direction using both her arms and her legs. However, it was futile. I simply made a small change to the battlefield. He changed into a more comfortable sitting position and said, it seems that the energy consumed for changing the environment won't be too far off as long as the changes aren't too big. Have you ever heard of the law of inertia? Inertia. When an object is not subject to external forces, it will either stay still or be in constant linear motion. Of course, you can also call it Newton's first law. The ground dramatically changed as soon as Roland hit the railing of the roof and stopped. The steel frame grew out of the ground and continuously extended into the sky, followed by the metal sheet cover which was wrapping up the black frames. Soon, a monument with glowing cold light appeared behind Roland. Each layer of the monument was evenly divided into around 10 rectangular units which looked like an elongated Rubik's cube. There was a black hollow steel tube coming out from the center of each of the rectangular units which were pointing towards Zero, who was still sliding at a constant speed. It's my turn now. Zero noticed something was wrong. She held up her longsword and the golden light appeared again. However, this time Roland was faster than her. Nearly 100 steel tubes roared at the same time. The burning gunpowder instantly heated up the air to over 1,000 degrees, and the rapid expansion of the air generated by the high pressure pushed the shells out of the tube towards the pure witch, Zero, with a speed of 1,900 meters per second. The loud roar was deafening, and the campus, which had just fallen into the night, was instantly lit up as if the sun just rose from the roof. There were 100 billion turrets and trillions of starlights. The night sky was lit up by the fireflies which just flew in. The densely gathered light spots drew a dazzling track in the night sky and poured onto the ground in a crisscrossing motion one by one. The fireflies were making a shrilling noise while struggling to flap their wings as if they were announcing their arrival to the world. Then, they crashed to the ground. The light of the fireflies was magnified by tens of thousands of times at that moment. Their bodies turned into broiling broken pieces which splattered all around. A roaring explosion noise was followed by the dazzling light which was combined with the echoes of a whistling sound in the sky. However, Roland was no longer able to hear the sonata formed by the intertwined metal and gunpowder, as his eardrums were already broken by the high-pitched sound of the first flame that was emitted by the black monument. The gigantic barrel was roaring below him and the boiling hot air had hurt his cheek. However, he was very happy. The world had become quite different as he was standing on top of the square monument. The entire roof was divided into equal parts, like a chessboard. Each block was pouring with cannon. He could see that Zero was being thrown up and down by the explosive air currents, like the falling leaves in a storm. Nothing could live under the coverage of gunfire. The deadly fireflies would follow and devour her again once she was reborn. She was unable to avoid this as she could not even change her direction on the non-friction ground, but helplessly she watched the numerous light spots with a long flame tail landed in front of her with a whistle. "It's impossible," Zero shouted incredulously. "You can't create things that don't exist out of nowhere. This doesn't exist." The ground was still as clean as new without a trace of scratch after the wash of gunfire, as if it had nothing to do with the flying fireflies in the sky. "It's smoother than a mirror and stronger than steel. It's impossible for such thing to exist." The pure witch Zero hysterically screamed. Although Roland could not hear her, he could guess what she felt. He could not turn himself into Superman, but he could create a power that was no less than a Superman. He changed the distance between atoms within the ground surface. Atoms were closely attached to each other with a strong interaction, like the soldiers who neatly lined up. This surface was almost absolutely smooth and incredibly strong. The tetrahedron carbide was as soft as water in front of it. Zero was completely confined as she could not run or hide and was surging up and down with the gunfire. It was nothing to do with will but the great disparity of knowledge. She had tried to activate the sigil of God's will several times. However, the continuous gunfire would not give her any respite and she gradually lost the sustainability of her appearance. "Please, let me go." Her voice was ringing in Roland's heart. "Are you going to kill your sister?" It became Garcia's plea after a moment. "Stop, you're such a monster. You're killing your family member." Followed by the reproach of King Wimbledon 3. However, Roland remained unmoved. "It's time to end it all," he answered in his heart. "I'll defeat the demons on behalf of you. Rest in peace." "No, I won't let you go." A dazzling blue light lit up the entire night sky along with Zero's scream. After that, the entire world fell apart. Chapter 629, After the Decisive Battle. There was clamor outside of the tent. Nail, who lay on the ground in a daze, turned his head to see that the thick curtain had been lifted by a corner and that His Excellency Iron Axe was bending down into the tent. Co-commander. He had never expected that the commander of the First Army would come to visit him. He quickly sat up straight and saluted. No need for etiquette. Iron Axe walked to his bedside and sat down, crossing his legs. "How's your injury?" "It doesn't matter. Only 2 teeth were broken." Nail touched his swollen cheek. "I'm not that hurt." "All right." Iron Axe then added, "Miss Nana has been so busy these days that, and since your wound wasn't too severe, you'll be recovering on your own. When the rescue is over, you can inquire and see Baron Pine to repair your teeth, and the First Army will pay for it." "I can fully understand, and there's no need to bother her with such a little injury. After all, Miss Nana is very tired." Nail hesitated for a moment before continuing. "How about Hound?" Hound was the one who had grabbed a teammate's spear and hit Nail to the ground, stunning him with the butt. Nail could still remember the moment that the other side had aimed a gun at Hound. "Don't worry. He's all right," Iron Axe said to comfort him. "He was pulled down by the guards the moment the other side raised their gun. He attacked you because of the pure witch's magic. So he won't be punished and has returned to the team to train." "Really?" Nail was a bit relieved. "I thought I was dead at that moment." "What about the other teams?" According to the arrangement before the war, each bunker had been arranged with 2 machine gun teams and a 5-man guarding platoon. So, even if the enemies approached a bunker, they had the ability to defend on sight. In addition to the 2 or 3 soldiers in charge of carrying ammunition on the team, all the others wore God's stones of retaliation. The seemingly perfect action appeared flawless. "These accidents happen," Iron Axe said with his hands outstretched, "but it didn't cause much harm, or we wouldn't be standing here." "Was the church forced back?" The minute he asked, Nail realized that it was an idiot's question. I want to know what happened after." "The enemies launched their final charge but failed to cross the 4th trench. Both the God's Punishment Army and the Judgment Army were completely defeated, leaving more than 2,000 bodies at the front of their position. They fled in haste." we won the battle. What confused Nail was that Iron Axe was not very excited, and instead, he said all this in a neutral tone. Iron Axe did not offer the reason, and Nail was not bold enough to ask. Then there was a long silence. After a long while, Iron Axe sighed and clapped him on the shoulder. "Since you're all right, have a good rest, and I'll go visit the other wounded guys." Seeing that Iron Axe was about to leave, Nail gathered his courage and stopped him. "Your Excellency." "What's up?" I want to leave the First Army," he whispered. Iron Axe frowned. "Why?" "Maybe, I can't be a machine gunner anymore." Nail lowered his head in shame. Every time he closed his eyes, he would see the scene where that young woman in the red cape was sprayed by a machine gun. "I wasn't able to immediately shoot at the enemy." "Your target was an underaged pure witch, right?" Iron Axe interrupted him. "Your team already reported that to me in their post-war summary." "I don't think that your idea is correct, but it can't be wrong. So, I'll just ask you one thing, are you going to betray His Majesty?" "No. Your Excellency, of course not." Nail quickly denied. "My life belongs to His Majesty." "So, I'm not going to approve your request," Iron Axe said without hesitation. "This is currently the most critical moment for the First Army and even City of Neverwinter. I demand that everyone in the army abide by his duty and guard His Majesty Roland Wimbledon at all cost. And, we have to spare no effort to do it. You can't be a gunner. Well, you can be an observer or a protector, but you're absolutely not allowed to leave the army, understand?" That last sentence from the commander was in an authoritative tone. "Yes. Your Excellency," Nail said, punctuating with a military salute. "That's all." After Iron Axe left, without looking back, Nail felt deeply startled. Were we not victorious? Why is the most critical moment now? And why did His Excellency Iron Axe so solemnly command the First Army to protect His Majesty Roland at all cost? A terrible thought suddenly occurred to him. Did His Majesty have an accident during the battle? As soon as he thought this, he shuddered. "How's it going?" Calvin Kant walked into his daughter's bedroom to see that she was picking up clothes. "The First Army and the witches have surrounded the castle tightly, and even I can't get in." Edith curled her lip. "But, if he gets better, the news will leak, so." "I guess, he was the same as before. What about you? Are you ready for a long journey?" Duke Calvin Kant picked up a black veil evening dress from a mountain of dresses on the bed and looked at it carefully. "Is this one too revealing?" Edith rolled her eyes. "I didn't say that I was going to pick it, and wasn't that a gift from you? At the time, you intended to let me wear it to attend Timothy's dinner party." "Ahem, really?" Calvin put down the gown sheepishly. "Do you think that His Majesty's troops will withdraw to City of Neverwinter?" "Probably." Edith stuffed several coats into the open suitcase. Although the church has been totally defeated, much of the First Army's supply was consumed. Advisor's department will take about a month to regain operational ability. If His Majesty Roland is fine, there's no reason for him not to stay in the northern region for a while. But, if he's unconscious, no one can guarantee the overall morale. Under this condition, Iron Axe absolutely wouldn't dare to continue attacking Holy City, so what he'll do shouldn't be difficult to guess. "Are you determined to follow them back?" Calvin asked with concern. "If something terrible happens to His Majesty, the kingdom may fall into civil strife, so it'll be safer for you to stay in the northern region." "That's why I'm going to City of Neverwinter." Edith stood up and slipped her long hair over her shoulder and onto her back. "It has become the new starting point for the kingdom there, whether Roland is there or not makes no difference. And, his coma presents both a challenge and an opportunity for the Kant family." Duke Calvin Kant could not help inhaling a cold breath. "Are you going to?" "Your thoughts are too simple." Edith shrugged. "The only one who can replace Roland is his sister Tilly Wimbledon, and I'm afraid that no one can connect the ordinary people with the witches except her." But, there's the problem that she's also a witch herself, so when dealing with the affairs of nobles, she needs greater help from the ordinary people. She paused. That person will undoubtedly be me. Dad, this is the best shortcut to climb that pinnacle of power and I don't want to miss it. Chapter 630, The Captive Pure Witch. Never before in her life had Nightingale felt so remorseful and regretful. She thought that as long as she stayed with Roland, no one could hurt him. However, without any bruises on her body, Nightingale stood in the bedroom of the castle in Deep Valley Town while Roland lay unconscious on the bed. There was not any magic reaction inside Roland's body and his internal organs were all intact. Therefore, Roland was neither cursed by a seed of peaceful death or something like that nor hurt by a powerful ability capable of destroying organs. Even though Agatha was knowledgeable, she could not distinguish this ability, let alone its breaking method. The witches had used all of the regular wake-up means they could think of, but they were all useless. Roland did not respond to any outside stimulus. If he was not breathing, Roland would have been considered dead. Now, Nightingale finally understood the warning from Agatha. There was no absolutely safe defense, even in front of the witch's abilities. But her understanding was too late. At this moment, hurried footsteps came from behind the door. Then Lightning opened the door and shouted. The pure witch has woken up. The witches in the room all instantly got excited. Everyone stay calm. It's useless for us all to go and investigate her, Wendy said, besides, we're not clear about her ability. For the sake of safety, Miss Agatha and Nightingale can go and figure this out for us. Respected deeply by the other witches, they all quietened at Wendy's calm tone. Nightingale took a deep breath and nodded to Wendy. I'll handle it. Based on her experience from being a runaway for several years, Nightingale was fully aware that her negative mood would not help to change the existing situation. She could not shirk her responsibilities because of a mistake she had made, no matter how big and especially at such a critical juncture. She must bring His Majesty, Roland, back. Let's go, Agatha sighed and said. When leaving the room, Nightingale could not help but look back to see that Anna was sat motionless on the bed with her eyes staring at Roland, as if no other things could draw her attention. Nightingale felt even guiltier in her heart. A servant room on the first floor of the castle that had been altered into a special detention room. Dozens of God's stone of retaliation were embedded behind the four walls forming a black hole, and thus, an anti-ability prison had been readied. Only by standing in the center of the room could a witch cast her ability. Nightingale was very clear about the target she was about to investigate. After the battle, the First Army found 3 pure witches that were still alive in a square-shaped pit within the third trench. One was detached, one was in a coma and the last one was conscious but trembling. According to the last one, there were 5 pure witches hidden underground: Zero, Isabella, Black Veil, Margie and herself, Vanilla. According to Vanilla's intelligence, she and Margie were only responsible for identifying the location of His Majesty, Roland, and sneakily escorting the other 3 to the battle. Thus they knew little about other arrangements. As for Zero, Isabella and Black Veil, they all were directly affiliated with the Pope and had the same status as an archbishop. Besides, their abilities were hidden by the Holy Church so that few knew the details. Black Veil was already dead and Zero had disappeared, so they could only get the breaking method from Isabel. After an examination, they had found out that the reason that Isabella was in a coma was that she had used all of her magic power. Therefore, Isabella would fully recover in 1 or 2 days. In addition, Agatha got a strange sigil on her hand, but she could not identify it because the magic stone was completely ruined. Unexpectedly, Isabella had been in a coma for 5 days and so Nightingale had been quite anxious, even wanting to forcibly wake her up with a knife. Lest for Wendy, she would have done so. Was she woken up? Agatha asked Lightning. Lightning shook her head and said, she woke up by herself. When it was Ash's turn to examine her, Isabella sat on the head of the bed and told us that the prison was useless for her. Nightingale's face became dark, asking, is she challenging us now? We'll find out, Agatha said calmly. Having passed through the layers of the strict guards of the First Army, Nightingale and Agatha walked into a narrow room where there were no windows. A rosine torch was hung high above their heads which gave off a dim light. There was nothing in this room other than a vertical wooden bed and a short table. Isabella sat motionlessly on the head of the bed. Her curled hair dropped naturally on her shoulders and became golden red under the firelight. She was still dressed in that bloody robe of priests with dust on her face that had solidified into yellow spots. It seems that Zero has completely failed. Before Nightingale asked her, Isabella took the initiative to say, finally, she isn't blessed by God. Blessed by God? Nightingale smiled coldly. Don't worry and I'll tell you everything I know. As if she did not hear the sarcasm, Isabella sighed and said, then, I'll be at your disposal. Nightingale was stunned by Isabella's attitude because she knew that Isabella was telling the truth. But it was a little too late to be a lamb. You've claimed that this prison can't hold you, haven't you? But now you choose to submit to fate? I'm capable of making the God's Stone of retaliation lose effect. As long as I have a platform, God's Stone would be useless, even if there are as many stones as you have here, Isabella said slowly. Except for that, I can neither walk through a wall nor escape away underground, so it's a waste to arrange such a room for me. You're capable of influencing the God's Stone? Agatha was very surprised and asked. Isabella said frankly, they indeed look like bottomless black holes, but I can make them lose effect. You mean that it was you who made the God's Stone worn by His Majesty, Roland, lose effect? Nightingale clenched her hands into fists. I had no other choice at that moment. Zero had become blinded by God. She believed that only one of the two can be blessed by God. Agatha covered Nightingale's hand and calmly asked, is it Zero who made His Majesty unconscious? What's her ability? Isabella frowned and said, unconscious? There should be a winner and loser instantly when a soul battlefield begins. If Roland didn't become Zero instantly, it means that Zero failed. Is he unconscious because he can't accept the huge volume of memories? Nightingale and Agatha looked at each other. Soul battlefield? Yes, Isabella said with her voice down, that's a battle about spirit and will. The winner gets everything, while the loser loses everything. Since Zero was awakened to be a witch, she's never failed in the battle of souls. She's engulfed numberless commoners and witches and absorbed their memories, knowledge and longevity. So for the time being, Zero has lived for over 200 years. Speaking of which, Isabella closed her eyes sadly, saying, I never thought that she would be defeated by a common prince. Chapter 631, Promises Then and Now. After hearing the description of the soul battlefield from Isabella, Nightingale began getting depressed. Do you mean that you also don't know how to make His Majesty wake up from the coma? She shook her head. This is unprecedented, and I have no idea how to deal with it. But Zero was absent-minded for a while when she was devouring Garcia. At that time, she explained that she had found some interesting things in Garcia's memory and so it took her a long time. Zero has had a more complicated life than anyone else, so if Roland wants to accept these parts of Zero's memories, it may take some more time. But as long as he's alive, he'll wake up naturally. Nightingale could not be sure whether this was true or not, but she could tell that Isabella did not lie. At least these conjectures were heartfelt thoughts from Isabella. But Nightingale also knew that the situation was not at all optimistic. Would the 200 years of memories from the church or His Majesty's memories dominate Roland? Or would Roland get lost in these complicated memories and never wake up? Even if Roland accepted all of Zero's memories, would he be that Roland Wimbledon, the fourth prince of Grey Castle that he used to be when he woke up? The one I look forward to seeing? The many thoughts made were almost impossible for Nightingale to control her mind. Then Nightingale also understood why Wendy had asked Agatha to come with her. Let's talk about the church, Agatha said after hesitating for a while. How much do you know about the Union, the predecessor of the church? I know almost all that Zero has learned. Isabella responded frankly. Are you still doubtful about the words in the letter? Since Zero took over the Pope's role, all of the pure witches that have been approved for the pivotal secret authority can enter the library and read the history of 400 years ago. The records about the witch empire and the demons in the letter are true. The limited information in the letter isn't valuable to us. Agatha smiled. The witch empire is just history for you, but for me, it's part of my life. I'm a witch in the Union. Isabella was surprised at this turn and asked, What did you say? I came from holy city of Tequila more than 400 years ago and witnessed the destruction of it. The demons aren't rare and still occupy most of the lands of Dawn Ridge. There are demon battalions at the end of Misty Forest and Redwater River to the west of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. Roland has encountered them before. Isabella was stunned in place, speechlessly. We'll fight with the demons eventually. We all know that the Battle of Divine Will is coming soon. Roland chose to fight this battle now in order to relieve the oppression of the church. Agatha paused and continued to say, What I want to know is, how did the Union transform into the church? It was a long time before Isabella became calm again. As mentioned in the history book, during the escape, a civil war broke out in the Union in the northwest of the impassable mountain range. There were no detailed reasons. We just know that the Union was separated into two groups since that time. One group, the Tequila Witches, got into the maze remains of the mountains. The other group, led by the witches of Starfall City, inherited Lady Alice's will to move northward and settled down on Hermes Plateau, which finally became the church. A civil war during the escape? Agatha frowned and said, This is undoubtedly suicide. The writer of that history book also thought so. The Union suffered heavy losses in the Civil War. 2 transcendents were lost and totally separated from the migration team of the common people. When the group going north arrived at their destination, most of those common people fled. Isabella sighed. As for the War of Faith later, it was to kill those non-combat witches who didn't belong to Starfall City. Only in this way could the church completely bury the history of the past. Is burying the past a reason to hunt witches wantonly? Even to go so far as to create the unconscious God's punishment army? Nightingale said in a cold tone, You are all crazy. Without this civil war, the 4 kingdoms would have been controlled by the Union from the beginning. The size of the God's punishment army would have been far larger, Isabella said peacefully. Of course, since Roland Wimbledon now has a better way, Holy City of Hermes isn't necessary any longer. You have no nostalgia for the church, said the Nightingale sarcastically. As long as the demons can be defeated, I don't care who'll take charge of the continent. That was also the Union's original intention. Isabella closed her eyes and said, although Zero was crazy, she had greater faith in fighting against the demons than most people, and that's why I chose to help her. Hearing this, Nightingale could not help pulling out a dagger. If killing her can wake Roland up, I won't stop you. Agatha whispered. After a long while, Nightingale indignantly put the dagger back into the sheath. By the way, one more thing, as soon as the two were ready to leave, Isabella suddenly spoke. Although Zero allowed pure witches to enter the temple to read the books in the library, she prohibited anyone from visiting the prayer room. Even moving close to it. She told me that it was only by standing there that she could meet God directly. Nightingale smashed the wall vigorously when going out of the captivity room and said, Damn it. We still can't find a way to awaken His Majesty. We've done what we can, all we can do is to continue to wait, Agatha said with comfort. Anyway, let's report what we've got to everyone first. I promise that she'll pay the price. As long as she's alive, she's important for us to tackle Holy City and explore the secrets of the God Stone. Soon, the witches gathered outside the bedroom and began to listen to the intelligence about the pure witches from Agatha. But Nightingale's mind had already drifted away. She quietly stepped back to the corner, cast the ability of the mist, and went into Roland's bedroom. Except for her, there was only Anna left in the quiet room. Nightingale slowly walked to the bed and saw Anna holding Roland's right hand, whispering something. Only by holding her breath could Nightingale hear the whispers of Anna. Do you remember what I said to you? If you're dead, I'll go to Sleeping Island with those who are willing to follow you and fight against the church to the end. But you're still alive. You're just sleeping. So I'll wait forever. As long as you still can breathe, I'll always be there for you. For 1 day, 1 year, or even my whole life. You can sleep soundly. I'll take care of you. Nightingale felt her heart fiercely tightening up. The feeling of heartbroken was even more unbearable than that of being badly hurt. Somehow, she bent over uncontrollably and covered her chest tightly. A warm river blurred her eyes. Chapter 632, Out of Deep Sleep. When the light pierced through the darkness and his blur vision adjusted to the light source, the white ceiling was the first thing that Roland saw. It took him several seconds to get rid of his dizziness, and he felt increasingly weird as his vision became clearer. Where exactly is this? Thought Roland. He suddenly sat up and noticed that he was actually sleeping in a modern-looking bedroom. He was sleeping in a soft bed with a table lamp and a box of napkins on one side and a maroon-colored wardrobe on the other side. The dazzling sun shone through the blinds and evenly poured on the mat and his arms, making him feel slightly warm. Damn. Is this fight not over yet? Roland's sleepiness completely disappeared in a sudden. He rolled off the bed and stretched out his hand to summon a gun for self-defense, but his hand was still empty after several attempts. His heart sank. Can it be, the rules of the battlefield have changed again? It's too bad. If I have to be unarmed, I would only be beaten up by the pure witch with her skills and speed. And, what about the deal of choosing my most impressive scene as the battle ring? I did not have any impression of this D***M room. Roland quietly walked to the bedroom door and leaned against the door to listen for a moment. He heard an intermittent voice, which seemed that someone was talking outside. He carefully held onto the door handle and slit the door. It was a more spacious room which was furnished as a living room. The old fan beside the empty couch was rattling and continuously buzzing. There were a tea table and a wall-hanging television with a constantly flashing screen in front of the couch. It was probably where the voice came from. Except that, no one was in the living room. Such situation was a little weird. Roland took a deep breath and slowly walked into the living room. The red ribbon on the fan cover was dancing along the wind, and the gently blowing cool wind refreshed him. He realized that the room was a little stuffy at the moment, and the echoing chirr of the cicadas signified that it was the summer season. A few magazines were scattered on the couch. Roland picked up one of them and flipped through it. The content was actually extremely childish. They were fashion news, horoscopes, and divination that were only read by immature little girls. He frowned even more deeply. This was apparently not his house, as he would not buy such magazines at all, be it in the past life or the present life. The news on the television at this moment attracted Roland's attention. Yesterday evening, an unexplainable explosion happened at a local university. A school building was damaged. The pictures of the scene showed that the entire rooftop had collapsed and there were scattered broken glasses everywhere. What actually happened? Now, let's contact the reporter at the scene. He dropped his jaw as he could hardly believe what he just saw. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm standing beside the school building where the explosion occurred. A female reporter appeared on the screen, and the background was the building where he battled with Zero. According to the witnesses, the flame lit up half of the sky with continuous explosions. Fortunately, there were no casualties, as not many students stay on campus due to the summer holiday. The entire campus is currently sealed by the police, and the students on campus are also transferred to the nearby hostels to be guided by the teachers. However, the cause of the explosion hasn't yet been clarified so far. What's your thought about the accident? We can only say that it's very strange. Everyone knows that it's impossible to even install a natural gas pipeline in the teaching building, not to mention the center of the explosion was on the top floor, the female reporter said in one breath. Some people speculated that it was a plane crash, some thought it was small meteorites, or some even say that it could be the alien arrival. Anyway, I'll immediately return with the message once the police have a definite conclusion. Thanks. The host nodded. Then, let's look at the next news. It's a hot summer and the heat is unbearable. Students should enjoy the long-lost holiday life at home instead of participating in the extracurricular classes. The Department of Education has issued a notice to prohibit private tutoring. Please call the hotline if you encounter any of such cases. Roland was not able to continue listening as the scene of the collapsing campus had filled his mind. Wasn't the Battle of Souls a fictional illusion? How could it be possible? After standing stoned for a while, he quickly ran towards the door of the living room as he had a sudden realization. A hot wave suddenly poured into the house when he opened the security door. A modern city appeared in front of him. The high-rise buildings at a distance formed a dense concrete jungle. It was a busy street not far away with endless crossing cars and pedestrians. And he was standing in the corridor of an apartment building. He turned around and saw a gold plate with number 0825 hanging in the middle of the low-grade door. If he did not misunderstand, it meant room 25 on the 8th floor. "Excuse me. Please don't block the corridor, will you?" Roland was slightly surprised. He turned around and noticed that the neighbor's door was opened before he knew, and a middle-aged woman was impatiently staring at him. The woman coldly hummed while walking past Roland after he tilted his body to one side. The strong smell of low-quality perfume flowed into his nose at the same time. What the heck, having no work and running around with only singlet and underpants. How can an adult be so shameless? The woman muttered to herself, and her voice just happened to float into Roland's ears. Such technique seemed to come in handy for middle-aged women. Roland walked back into the house and loudly closed the door. "Come out. 0. Don't waste the time hiding. Is this your newly designed trick? Piecing pieces of my memories together? Don't be ridiculous. It's simply an illusion." Nothing happened in the room even though Roland shouted for a while. Roland grabbed a glass cup on the table and smashed it on the wall. The cup was instantly broken into pieces. "Is this how you defeat me?" he sneered to himself. "Trying to trap me in this consciousness forever? You won't be able to lock me up, 0. He immediately acted without any hesitation. How can I get away if this is another illusion of the Battle of Souls, thought Roland. Suicide was definitely the last option, and Roland decided to start with a simple one, to create a fall. He moved a few chairs over and stacked them from big to small ones with the back of the chair against the couch so that he would not be wounded even if he failed. When it was completed, he stepped onto the constantly rocking chairs and climbed slowly to the top. His head was almost touching the ceiling at the moment, and falling backward was indeed scary. However, this psychological barrier was nothing to Roland as he had experienced different ways to die by now. He could hear someone unlocking the door from the outside when he was on top of the rocking chairs. Perhaps the real owner of this house has returned? Roland thought. The highly stacked chairs collapsed before he could balance himself. Roland struggled to turn around during the frantic fall and saw a young girl who was about 11 or 12 years old walking into the room with a backpack. However, he could instantly recognize her from her white long hair and light red eyes. 0. And she was obviously surprised to see Roland at the same time. "What are you doing, Uncle?" The picture became twisted in a sudden as if the world was being reversed. Roland quickly bounced up and gasped for air twice. The familiar room reappeared in his eyes. The gray stone wall with tiny cracks, thick velvet curtains, and the magic stone that was silently glowing. This is the city of Neverwinter? Plunk. It was the sound made by the wooden pot dropping on the floor. Roland followed the sound and found that Anna was blankly standing there. The pot that dropped on the floor was spinning and the spilled hot water had wet a huge area of the map. And the girl quickly ran to him. Chapter 633, Welcome back. After clinging to each other for a very long time, Roland stroked Anna's face and said in a gentle tone, "You've become thinner." Even though there were tears in her eyes, Anna's eyes were still as pure as lake water. Roland could clearly see his shadow in her blue eyes. But Anna looked much thinner. Through her clothes, Roland could feel her slightly raised backbone and see her prominent collarbones. Her face was not as mellow as before. "I'm so sorry for letting you worry about me." Smelling the fragrance of Anna, Roland felt quiet in his heart again. It was just a blink of an eye, but they felt like that they met each other after a few centuries apart. Anna shook her head and wiped her tears with his collar, saying, "I'm okay, as long as you woke up. For how long was I in a coma? 3 days or a week? Roland was not sure about the numbers when seeing that Anna had become so skinny. Over a month. What? Roland was astonished. To be exact, it was 52 days. Seeing his stunned face, Anna could not help bursting into laughter and said, "It's fall now. You should notice that those curtains were changed. I was unconscious for nearly 2 months." Roland disbelievingly moved his arms and secretly curled his toes. But he did not feel any discomfort. "How did I eat?" "You didn't eat anything." Anna leaned on his shoulder with her hands tightly holding his clothes, as if she was very afraid that Roland would fall asleep again. "Someone has eaten in your stead." Is that possible?" "It's the ability of Nightfall of the Bloodfang Association. She planted a seed of symbiosis in your body, and so she just needed to eat more than usual." A witch's ability could be used like this. Roland thought that it was amazing because this kind of symbiosis did more than just sustain his life. Due to the fact that the muscles in his hands and feet did not shrink, it was able to connect 2 living bodies together to share one circulatory system. Roland sighed for a while and looked at a wooden tub on the ground. "Thanks for taking care of me these days." Without a doubt, there must be someone who had cleaned his body and changed his clothes in order to keep him clean in the nearly 2-month coma. Besides, this process was very complicated and only Anna, who was patient and loving, could do it day after day, Roland thought. "Compared with what you've done, I've done nothing," Anna said gently. "You've honored your commitment to the witches. You've defeated the core of the church. Each witch of the Witch Union would like to show their gratitude to you. Even without me, someone would take care of you. But I would prefer that you take care of me." Roland stared at her and lowered his head to kiss Anna. After a long while, they parted with each other reluctantly. With her cheeks blushing, Anna said, "Well, I must tell the other witches. They've waited for this day for a long time." "We could continue?" Roland said with a smirk. Anna slanted her head subconsciously and said, "You've just woken up and you should take a good rest." "But I feel like I'm full of energy." "Even so, we can't continue." Anna raised her hands to hammer him a few punches and then turned around to pick up the tub. She walked towards the door reluctantly and said, "I'll be back soon. I've had enough sleep, so don't be worried." Roland gave her a smile. After Anna closed the door and Roland frowned. "Why have I slept for such a long time? Does this have a relationship with the strange phenomenon in my dream?" Roland thought. Roland felt a deep sense of unease. Generally speaking, after people woke up from a dream, they would forget its content quickly, and even completely forget it in less a day. But until now, Roland still clearly remembered what had happened in his dream. Was the little teenage girl really Zero? But why did she call me uncle? Besides, she could not disguise the shock in her face. The more Roland recalled, the more he considered strange. The city in his dream was absolutely not where he had lived in the past. The school in the TV represented compelling proof of that. The university should be built beside a mountain and was part of a scenic area. Towering buildings were not allowed around the university, but he had seen a gray skyline formed by skyscrapers in the background of the news story that played. Something was also wrong with the apartment. Those walkways connected side by side, which were the most outdated tube-styled apartments. They were built in the 1970s and 1980s and were ill-adapted to both the busy streets hundreds of meters away and the skyscrapers afar. Besides, the ink-green anti-theft door and outdated desk fan looked a strange match to the hanging colorful TV. If an owner did not have a special hobby, no one would decorate his own living room like this. Everything seemed to be real while everything was problematic. Before disappearing, Zero had hysterically shouted at Roland that she would never let him go. Were her words a curse or a threat to Roland? Did she count on creating such a bad dream to confuse him? After all, it would only be a little bluff if she only made him dream several nightmares. When Roland was still lost in thought, there were noises behind the door. A group of witches rushed over to the bedroom and surrounded him. In front of them, Roland felt somewhat embarrassed. Ahem. In a word, I'm all right. these days. Before Roland finished his words, Lightning jumped onto the bed and hugged his neck. Thank God, Wendy put her hands on her chest and said in an excited tone, you finally woke up. Lily curled her lip and said, what a troubling guy. You made us worry for such a long time. Mystery Moon murmured, are you worried about others? This is very rare. Compared to witches, commoners are much more fragile. Agatha pulled out a stone of measuring, watched it before Roland and continued to say, there isn't any magic reaction, and it seems that you didn't inherit Zero's abilities. What can you remember? How about the memories of the Pope? Roland felt a little surprised and asked, do you know this ability? We've held a pure witch of the church captive. We've heard of it from her. Really? It seems that I didn't receive her memories. Wait a moment. What if he isn't the previous Prince Roland? Maybe he's been dazzled by the memories of over 200 years? Ashes stood up and asked, who can prove that he's Roland, not Zero? Come on, don't make trouble. Can you not? Andrea rolled her eyes at Ashes and said. I'm quite sure that he's His Majesty, Roland. Nightingale's voice came from the other side of the bed, but to Roland's surprise, Nightingale did not appear her usual self. Then Nana, Scroll, Leaf. Among all the caring voices from the witches, Roland felt warmth all over his body. The last one was Tilly. She held Roland's hand and said with a smile on her face. Welcome back, my brother. Chapter 634, Nothing to Fear. An hour later, Roland finally figured out what happened when he had been in a coma for more than a month. Undoubtedly the church had been hard hit as nearly all of the soldiers of the God's Punishment Army were killed, and half of the soldiers of the Judgment Army died on the battlefield. Among the more than 2,000 enemies who fled, most of them had taken the pill of madness and would corrode due to the magic power sooner or later. What was worse, the Pope disappeared and most of the senior commanders died in battle. After this battle, Holy City of Hermes would never have the chance to invade the border of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. It would even have difficulty in surviving the months of demons which would come soon. But the First Army also suffered heavy losses. That was mainly caused by the sudden assault of the witch, Black Veil. All those soldiers who saw her eyes and did not wear the God's Stone of Retaliation had been affected to some extent. Of the more than 700 casualties, 80% were caused by her. The fall of Roland had also greatly undermined the morale of the army. In such circumstances, Iron Axe had to issue an order to withdraw the troop. Fortunately, at this time, the function of City Hall had been faultless. With concerted efforts all around, it did not encounter any problems. The statement to the public was that His Majesty was wounded in battle and needed to stay in bed. The funeral of the First Army soldiers killed in battle was also held by Iron Axe and Barif. After listening to the account of the witches, Roland's interest in the captured pure witches was piqued. You just said, they don't have much affection for the church? He turned to Agatha. And that witch named Isabella is willing to help us fight the demons? Neither Vanilla nor Margie were cultivated by the Archbishop. They were just chosen from the cloister to carry out this task. Nightingale has confirmed it. Agatha replied. It's strange that Isabella seems not to care about whom she serves, as long as they can defeat the demons. She said she got that idea from the last pope. What's your opinion on that? I suggest keeping Isabella for the time being. But she's a pure witch raised by the church. She's our enemy. Scroll frowned and said, if it were not for her, that witch named Zero wouldn't have had the chance to hurt His Majesty at all. As far as I know, Wendy was also raised by the church. She's different. She's never used her power to hurt anyone. Isabella also did not directly hurt any witch. Her ability only works on the God's Stone, while the witches rarely take the initiative to wear the stones. Agatha refuted. Nightingale confirmed that she did not lie. Is that right? Roland looked to the other side of the bed. After quite a while, he heard a reluctant reply from there. Yeah. Most important of all is her ability, Agatha continued. Isabella mentioned any black hole formed by the God's Stone of Retaliation had a unique tremor, and she could create an opposite tremor so that the stone would lose its function. Perhaps this is the key to figuring out the secret of super magic. I even suspect that she's a natural super magic. If we can figure out the relationship between the god stone and the magic power, the other witches may also be able to do the same. Hearing that, the crowd could not help gasping in astonishment. For most of them, the god stone of retaliation was a shackle which they could not throw off. Due to the restraint of the god stone, they were subjected to oppression and exile, and they were helpless in the face of capture by the church and the noble. Roland thoughtfully stroked his chin. Creating a tremor to cancel out another tremor? This is basically the same characteristics of the wave. Does it mean that magic power also spreads in accordance with the way a wave spreads? In that case, leave her aside, he said after a moment of pondering, wait until I see her. Obviously, the witches were not the only ones in Neverwinter who were concerned about his safety. In the afternoon, Berev, Iron Axe, Carl and other high officials received the news and came to the castle one after another. Everyone had a relieved look after seeing him, especially City Hall Director Berev, who even sobbed when hugging Roland. As he just awoke, instead of asking too much about political affairs, he just casually chatted with them in order to placate them. His long-period absence due to his coma had panicked the insiders of Neverwinter. Now the most important thing to do was to cheer them up and inform everyone that their king had recovered. In the evening, a sumptuous feast was held in the castle. Almost all of the officials of City Hall and the First Army were present. The lines of tables full of food were even extended to the yard. What was more, Roland also ordered that they should send carts of hot oatmeal to the square so that all of the citizens could also participate in this celebration. After having dinner together, Roland went to his bedroom. "Nightingale," he said softly. No one responded. "Nightingale," he repeated. "I know you're here." Still no response. Roland sighed, turned and walked out of 2 steps. He reached out and felt Nightingale standing there. He held her up before she prepared to kneel down after appearing out of the mist. Well, he seemed to have become stronger. But that was not important. Roland stared at her fiercely and said before she opened her mouth, "I know you feel guilty. But it's not your fault and I'm safe now. So don't blame yourself anymore. Do you understand? Agatha had reminded me, but I still..." "Ah, your Majesty?" Roland directly hugged her. This was the first time he brought himself to hug Nightingale. Roland had originally prepared a lot of words to comfort her, but he changed his mind when he was going to open his mouth. He knew what she really needed. Before he was hit by the shadow of Zero, Nightingale pushed him away, regardless of her own safety. The scene where she stood in front of him to protect him was still vivid in his memory. She was prepared to sacrifice herself for him at that moment. So what else should he expect from such a woman? "Wait for me," Roland whispered. "I'll settle it." Settle, what? He did not reply, but he knew that Nightingale knew what he meant. Her slightly eager breath was the best proof. The silence was often an invisible injury. Since he could not ignore it, he had to take on the responsibility. Even if it was a path through the thorns. He felt Nightingale gradually relax in his embrace. After her anxiety was finally relieved, she became determined again. When someone was vulnerable, a promise would be enough. Then the expectation was not in vain. "Ah, I'll wait." She wept. Her eyes were full of tears, but the sadness disappeared. The wet and warm tears also filled Roland's heart with determination. After Nightingale left, he slept soundly that night. When he opened his eyes, he saw that white ceiling again. Well, it's this awful dream again. As he had already known how to get away from the dream, he was quite calm this time. Rubbing the back of his head which was still aching, he walked out of his bedroom. He saw that white-haired girl carrying the plates out of the kitchen. "You got up finally." She frowned. "Did you go mad yesterday, Uncle?" Chapter 635, The Apartment of Souls. "Zero?" asked Roland hesitantly. She rolled her eyes and bent down to lay the plates before sitting cross-legged at the coffee table. What are you doing there? Don't you want to have breakfast? The little girl had a soft tender voice and a slender figure. She wore a light blue dress and white silk stockings. Her feet were about the size of his palms. She was totally not like that crazy pure witch who threatened to kill him. However, she did not deny the name, which meant that she admitted that she was Zero. What should I do? Kill her? Now that she's just a little girl, isn't it impossible for her to tear me into pieces barehanded like an extraordinary? Roland sneaked into the kitchen and hid a fruit knife which he got from the knife shelf into his belt before he slowly walked toward the coffee table. There was a fried egg and 2 fried bread sticks on his plate. Well, he got one more than her. The fried egg had a golden outer ring and slightly scorched edge, its lightly bulged center revealed a faint orange. It was obviously a perfect fried egg with a soft yolk. Zero skillfully picked up the fried egg with her chopsticks and devoured it in a few bites before she began to eat the fried bread sticks. What were you doing yesterday? Had you seen some cockroaches on the ceiling? No. I found it a bit dirty, so I wanted to clean it. Roland casually made a reason. Really? She glanced at the ceiling and asked, why didn't you clean it with a rag tied on a clothing pole? It didn't work. Anyway, it's clean now, he coughed and asked, you made the breakfast? Uncle, are you all right? Zero appeared to be a little worried now. Since I moved here, isn't it I who has always made the breakfast? Since you moved here? So where did you live before? Roland opened his mouth but did not ask. Obviously she would suspect his identity if he kept asking. Zero quickly finished her breakfast. She stretched one of her hands in front of him and said, give me some money to buy food. What? We are running out of food in the refrigerator. I have to go to the food market to buy some. How can I go without money? A middle school student already knows how to buy food from the food market? Roland thought while fumbling in his pocket for his wallet but found nothing. Well. In the second drawer of your bedside table, said Zero with a sigh. He returned to the bedroom and found a nearly empty wallet. In there were about 300 yuan and several lottery tickets. How much do you need? Roland returned to the living room. 20, I can't carry more food anyway. Since it was not his money, Roland generously gave her a 50 yuan bill and said, you can keep some for the next time. Zero took a surprised glance at him and tucked the bill into her coin purse. Your hand, Roland noticed the 2 band-aids on her fingers. I was hurt when I picked up the broken glass. It's not a big deal. Of course, it would be better if you don't litter. She shrugged and carried her school bag before walking to the door. I'm going to school. I won't come back in the noon, so remember to clean the dishes. Wait, isn't it summer vacation now? Of course it's the tutoring center, said Zero, putting on her shoes and poked her head out from the door. Uncle, if you think your head is still hurting, go to see the doctor. And don't do stupid things anymore. After half a minute, Roland walked out of room 0825 and looked down while leaning over the corridor railing. Soon he saw Zero walk out of the building. Her white hair was particularly eye-catching in the crowd. Strangely, people on the street seemed to be used to it as no one walking by her would cast any curious glance at her. She waited a while until another 2 blonde-haired girls skipped toward her and they left together through an alley. So she has made friends in this world? Roland could not help rubbing his forehead and thought, what an absurd dream. What should I do next? Should I follow her? He did not believe that Zero could really create a complete city. When Roland turned around and wanted to go back to the room, looking for the key, he was suddenly startled by what he saw. A pretty woman walked toward him. She had long gray hair, high eyebrows, and her nose and lips bore a resemblance to those of Tilly. However, she had a cold and arrogant temperament that kept men at arm's length. He never met her before, but Prince Roland's memory obviously told him that she was his elder sister, Princess Garcia of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. Garcia Wimbledon. Roland subconsciously reached for the fruit knife in his belt. Step aside. Get out of my way, the woman showed a disgusted expression, let me pass. You don't know me? He was very surprised. She sneered and said, "Why should I know you?" "Because your hair is dyed the same color as mine?" Roland stared at her, slowly getting out of her way. "You are Garcia, right? So what?" Her expression became gloomy. "Since you know my name, you should know what will happen if I am annoyed. I warn you, you will bring trouble to yourself if you trouble me." She stretched out her right hand and curled her fingers one by one, making cracking sounds with her knuckles as if she had prepared to fight. She doesn't know me, but why she doesn't feel surprised that I know her name? Roland found it difficult to understand. Garcia returned to her room, and the door banged shut behind her. He wandered around along the corridor and took a quick glance when he passed by her room. The room number was 0827, so she lived next to his neighbor. Looking at the numerous security doors along the long corridor, he suddenly had a horrible speculation. How many households are there in this apartment? After all, the corridor was terribly long. Standing in front of room 27, he could not even see the end of the corridor. He could not help thinking about it. He returned to his room as soon as possible, fumbled the key into the front door, and then he locked the door and ran along the corridor toward the further end. It was not shorter than a 400-meter straight track. Panting and running to the end of the corridor where it was close to the stairwell, Roland saw the last room number, 0899. This was simply incredible. Who would design a tube-shaped apartment with nearly 100 households on one floor? In accordance with the style of the 70s and 80s, a row of more than a dozen households had been considered large-scale. Roland then climbed up the stairs. Most of the green paint of the iron staircase handrails had peeled off, and he could see the obvious rust and dust. There were numerous small advertisements along the corridor revealing distinctive characteristics of the times. These kind of psoriasis advertisements should have long since disappeared in the big cities. The top floor was the 22nd floor. On the security door at the end of the corridor, there was no nameplate or barred window. He checked one by one until he saw the first number, 2245. Through his rough calculation, he found that there were 2,124 households in the entire apartment building. It's impossible for you to win. I have devoured thousands of soldiers and even an extraordinary over the years. He suddenly recalled what Zero said during the fight for life on the rooftop. Are all people living here the losers of the Battle of Souls? Roland was stunned by this speculation. Now, Zero seemed to have become one of them. Chapter 636, Illusory Reality. Roland climbed more than a dozen floors all at once. When he relaxed his muscles, he felt the intense soreness in his legs. There were no elevators in this old building. Even if this was only a dream, Roland still felt fortunate that he did not appear on the top floor. Undoubtedly, Zero must be the one that created this, but this would not only be the act of Zero. No one would retaliate against Roland by using this kind of method. Why would she spend so much effort to create such a bizarre dream, just to let me witness her failure? This not only took away her memory as a pure witch but also turned her into a fragile middle schooler. At that moment, many evil ideas flashed through Roland's mind. With Zero's current status, she would not be able to fight back no matter what Roland did to her. Would this count as retaliation? It could be only said that at this moment, Zero indeed did something which created an irreversible twist of memory. However, the final result was something that was far from what she expected. If this gigantic tube-shaped apartment was the honest reflection of Zero's memory, this was merely just an apartment. Far away, there was a multitude of skyscrapers, swarms of cars and pedestrians on the street. Apparently this belonged to Roland's memory, a soul that came from the modern world. Zero and those she engulfed appeared in this dream as modern people. This testified that her scheme was a failure. That would be a more reasonable speculation. What about myself then? Roland was pondering this question as he slowly walked down the stairs. He did not belong here, or at least, he did not belong to this loser tower. One obvious characteristic was that his memory remained intact, and he knew that this was a dream and that he could leave this place anytime he willed it. Of course, next he had to make a more convenient falling tool, and then go back to the sofa to hit his head. This time Roland could still feel a slight pain, which means that the authenticity of the dream could already compare to reality. That being the case, which step can be done to a greater degree? Is it encompassing or is it an empty shell? Roland returned to room 0825 and once again examined the residence. It had a standard layout of 3 bedrooms and 1 living room with no terrace. The 3 single rooms were Roland's bedroom, Zero's bedroom, and 1 storage room respectively. There were big objects in the storage room. For example, there was an old bicycle without wheels, a sewing machine, and a rusted iron gate. They would not even be worth any money for recycling. Next, he walked to Zero's bedroom. There was a sign on the door that said, "No unauthorized entry." Such a caveat was nothing in Roland's eyes. He pushed open the door without hesitation. A slight but pleasant scent floated into his nose. It was a tiny room with all the furniture neatly organized. All the blankets were folded, the desk was neat, and the floor was spotlessly clean. Roland walked around. An anime diary on the corner of the desk soon caught his attention. Has she the habit of keeping a diary? This would be a great opportunity to learn about Zero's past experiences. There was no emotional pressure on Roland in regards to taking a peek at a little girl's diary in a dream. Roland picked up the pink book and found that there was a plastic lock on the side of the diary. However, that would be not enough to stump Roland. The plastic lock merely served as emotional comfort for kids. It would not actually prevent someone from peeping at the diary. Roland found 2 toothpicks, stuck the toothpicks into the keyhole and moved the toothpicks back and forth. He opened the plastic lock after only a few tries. Roland flipped to the first page. The handwriting on the page seemed immature, but there were rarely any ink dots or whiteouts. Apparently, she was very serious when she wrote the diary. February 16th, due to the relocation of school, I've been sent to a house in an unfamiliar city. The house owner is called Roland, a somewhat untidy uncle. He works at a bar and always sleeps during the day, leaves the house at night, and comes back very late at night. He always has this disgusting smell of alcohol on him. I don't really want to live here. But my family said that he only asks the minimum rent and provides meals. My family will send me to the countryside if I make another complaint about this house. What kind of absurd setting is this? Roland could not help but seethe. He went to a bar only a few times in his life, not to mention working at a bar. Despite such absurdness, the dream itself was an unreasonable place that often connected numerous unrelated fragments, and no one would notice any difference in the dream. With that thought, Roland did not feel like fretting over this dream anymore. February 27th, school has started. Uncle Roland seems to have lost his job. He looks very depraved. Dinner yesterday was a cup noodle that I bought. March 2nd, I've spent all my allowance buying cup noodles recently. This isn't a good sign. The magazine said that at age 12, the body is developing and so there needs to be enough nutrition for growth. I have to talk to Uncle. If he beats me up then, I'll endure a bit more. I'd rather not go to the countryside. March 3rd, he agreed with my suggestion. That's great. Every month he would give me living expenses to buy fresh food. But if I'm not in school, I'll be responsible for making the meals. Who is taking care of whom? I feel like he should give me a salary for this. Never mind, I always do the chores back at home too. I'm used to it. June 8th, it has been 3 months since I arrived in the new city. I've made lots of friends. I have the best grades in my class. Although Uncle Roland is untidy and always seems careless, he's actually not a bad guy. At least he doesn't beat me. The only thing is that he still hasn't found a job yet. Looks like he's giving up soon, and that isn't a good sign. We wouldn't be able to survive just depending on the living expense that Uncle Roland's family sends to him. I have to help him. June 22nd, It's so difficult to make money. I sold some anime drawings to students in tutoring class and only got 15 yuan. That isn't even enough to buy 2 days of food. Am I too careless when I speak to Uncle? In the end, he's still an adult. I feel like I've been impolite, but I just couldn't control myself. Have I reached my rebellious phase? June 25th, Jesus Christ. I was so frightened today. I saw that Uncle Roland fell from a chair. Good thing that there was a sofa beneath him. Putting the chair that high, was he committing suicide? This was so frustrating. What if he injured himself? That would make him less likely to get a job. Whatever, tomorrow I'll ask him what happened. Besides the trivial details, Roland spent only half an hour to finish the whole diary. He now understood the reason that Zero had been living with him. The dream made up backgrounds for everyone that matched with his or her modern identity. This was undoubtedly a very complex structure. He would not be able to accomplish this just by using his brain. No wonder he was in a coma for almost 2 months after the soul duel. He put the diary back to the original place. Roland noticed something that dazed him for a moment. There was a stack of books next to the desk. It seemed to be that little girl's textbooks. Roland swallowed and moved all the textbooks to him. The first textbook was a literature book and the second was a social science textbook. When Roland saw the third textbook, he was out of breath for a moment. It was an 8th grade chemistry textbook. Its content was simple with only a few words. The majority of the book was pictures. From a glance, it almost looked like the book I Wonder Why. When Roland flipped to the last page, a folded long page fell out. Roland flattened the page, a complete periodic table of elements appeared before his eyes. Chapter 637, Development Plan. Waking up from the dream world, Roland sprang out of his bed. Unable to contain his excitement any longer, he draped his coat over his shoulders and hurried to his office. He took out several blank papers and started to write down the missing parts of the periodic table of elements and elementary chemistry from his memory. He also concluded some rules from the previous 2 trips to the dream world. First, the time passed at a different pace in that world. This was easy to understand, as even a nap was enough for a long, vivid dream. Roland thought it might be caused by the increased response speed of the brain. In a dream, it just needed to pull all the sensory inputs out from the memory and enter them into a dream instead of uploading and processing information from all 5 senses. Take the last trip as an example. He had left the dream world at 3 p.m. by falling from a standing herringbone ladder in his bedroom before Zero had come back. Until that time, he had spent 8 hours in that world. However, when he woke up in the real world, it was still midnight and the moon was shining high in the sky. Second, his brain had been so excited in the vivid dreams that traveling to the dream world did not mean having a rest. This was a tricky problem, as in this way he would be busy for the whole 24 hours of a day. In the day, he had to handle state affairs in the real world, and at night, he needed to make money to raise the family in the dream world. He was surprised to find that he himself had become one of the model workers of Neverwinter, and the most hard-working one. By now, he had not yet tried to sleep in the dream world. Due to the time differences, he guessed sleeping in it would be more efficient. Third, the dream world was different from ordinary dream experiences. This world was clear, stable, and had its own rules. This must have been caused by Zero. She had created this new world about which he knew just a little bit. He wondered at this world, thinking, does it have boundaries? How many fragments does it mix? How much hidden or forgotten information will I discover there? He waited out the night until the dawn reached. After having breakfast, he summoned all high officials of City Hall to the reception hall of his castle. He needed to check on the progress of their works after the whole month, and more importantly, he wanted to work out the development plan for the next development stage for the coming challenge. Now that the church was no longer a major threat, he had to get ready for the upcoming attacks from demons and put his all into the preparation for the battle of divine will. Roland set his eyes on the other kingdoms. Bear wiped his forehead and said, you mean we'll recruit people not only from each domain of Grey Castle but also from Everwinter and Wolfheart? Your Majesty, it's a very big project. Roland said in a deep voice, the news that the church has suffered a sharp defeat will soon spread all over the continent. After that, Holy City of Hermes can hardly control Everwinter and Wolfheart. Seeing the sign of weakness, those local noblemen driven to the church by the wars will turn their backs on it soon. This offers us an exciting opportunity to draw their people to Grey Castle with gold royals or even violent measures. Not being affected by any form of nationalism, people of this era did not care very much about who they worked for, as long as they could bring their families together with them. Roland continued to explain, in the next spring, the seaport of Neverwinter will be put into use. All you have to do is to formulate a recruiting plan, rent ships from the fjords merchants and find places to accommodate the newcomers in the city. I know this will cost City Hall a huge sum of gold royals, but we've got to do this no matter what. All of you know it clearly that the church isn't our ultimate challenge. As City Hall had lots of related experiences, Roland was confident in this ambitious plan to expand population in a short time. For example, City Hall had sent emissary delegations to the Southern Territory and the Eastern region to recruit people for many times before this plan. As for resettlement work, it also had rich experiences and a whole set of regulations. City Hall of Neverwinter had already become a reliable and mature administration body. However, it had no experience in sea transportation. Roland planned to ask Thunder and Margaret's Chamber of Commerce to assist it. By the way, in order to lighten your workload, I'll officially hire Miss Edith Kahn to work as your adjutant in City Hall. Roland paused a little and continued, I find no fault with her previous performance in Cold Wind Ridge Battle and the work in Advisor Department. I believe you'll feel much easier with her help. Bhairav said anxiously, Thank you, Your Majesty, but I can do it on my own. Roland interrupted him. I've decided. Just do what I say. After that, he turned to look at Scroll, saying, Education is another focus in the next development stage. How did the training of the secondary teachers go? Scroll shook her head and said, By now, only Ferlin has passed the assessment test. Your Majesty, I'm afraid this method won't work. I see. Roland was not surprised by the failure of the plan. As most of the Neverwinter's primary teachers were knights, using the teaching materials written by Scroll, they did not have any trouble teaching the students to read and write. However, when the Education Ministry wanted to improve the quality of the teachers, it met a problem. The only reason for the knights' reading and writing abilities was that they had had access to education. Being literate did not necessarily mean that they were good at studying. To become secondary teachers, they need to be qualified in disciplines including math, physics, and chemistry, which were not easy to learn. Roland thought for a while and made a decision, saying, Given that, let's pick new secondary teachers from the students. To encourage top students to continue their studies at school, we need to include a scholarship scheme in the budget for the next year. SCH scholarship? Scroll thought for a moment and continued, Do you mean the reward system we've adapted in Longsong Stronghold? Roland explained, No, not at all. That reward system was designed to attract more people to the school, but this scholarship scheme only rewards the top students. It aims to attract them to continue studying in the school by offering them money as much as most workers can make. Generally, when a student completed universal education and got a diploma, he would try to find a job to raise his family as soon as possible instead of furthering his studies at school. To make sure that people who were good at studying would get better trained, he must build a special fiscal fund, namely, a scholarship scheme, to subsidize those people. Roland continued to explain his plan to Scroll. First, you can set high standard score to pick out only 20 to 30 students who'll be paid for with scholarships, and then you work with Ferlin to teach them. Their learning speed must be much faster than that of those knights. After the training, anyone who passes the assessment is qualified to become a secondary teacher whose starting monthly salary is 50 silver royals, and the ones who fail in the assessment can apply for the other jobs. When he got the first batch of secondary teachers, he planned to soften the terms of the scholarship scheme and promote the higher level of knowledge and education among the people. Chapter 638, The Temptation of the Periodic Table of Elements. Bhairav said, Your Majesty, City Hall has no problem with this program, but we don't need that many secondary teachers, do we? Knowing that Edith would soon become an official member of City Hall, Bhairav looked a little unhappy but still focused on the subject of the discussion. Roland was pleased to see this mature reaction. The prince ticked off the other jobs those students could do, saying, they don't have to become secondary teachers. With better education background, they can choose to become researchers and managers in the plants. They should understand the principles behind the machines instead of simply knowing how to operate them. They should know how to train workers, how to maintain or, perhaps, improve equipment. The Ministry of Education must make efforts to turn our people into industrial personnel. Otherwise, it'll be meaningless to have a large population. Industrial personnel? Scroll repeated Roland's words in a low voice and then asked, does it refer to the people engaged in industrial production? Almost. Roland confirmed and continued to explain his idea. The people who have finished universal education can become ordinary workers, namely, junior industrial personnel. By having more of them, we could scale up our industrial production, but industrialization isn't just about scale. City Hall won't be able to take care of everything, so I want to see 2 to 3 out of 100 people get secondary or even higher education level. They can be placed on both production and management positions, so did the secondary teachers. By doing so, we'll see that the plants will become independent organizations who can develop themselves following the instruction of City Hall. Without education, Neverwinter could not enjoy its population dividend no matter how many people it had. Due to the limited education resources, he could not make secondary and higher education universal right now. To quench his thirst for talents, he decided to use the scholarship scheme to quickly select and foster a batch of capable people for the city. As to the other people, in his plan, as long as they finished primary education and became literate, they would fill ordinary production positions, like a cog in a machine. I see, Scroll said. Roland tapped on the table and added, there's another thing. Add ideological education to the universal primary education. I'll give you a detailed teaching plan later. He could not help but recall the contents of the textbook of ideological and moral education he had read in Dream World. In this era, strengthening ideological and moral construction was as important as adapting steam engines. Seeing Scroll nodded, he stood up and glanced at everyone in the hall, saying, to sum up, this year and the next, City Hall should focus on expanding the population, enhancing education and upgrading industrial production, especially the first 2 tasks. They'll determine how far we can go. I hope that all of you will do your best before the arrival of more dreadful and powerful enemies. We'll do our best for your majesty. All the officials stood up and said simultaneously. And it's also for yourselves. Roland heaved a sigh of relief and continued. That's all for today's meeting, Anne. Kalsichi, come to my office. Chief Alchemist followed Roland to the office. As soon as he closed the door, he asked straightforwardly, Your Majesty, do you have any new idea or new product to make? If not, I hope I can go back to my lab earlier. Roland could not help but smile, saying, You're still so impatient. Come on, sit down. I've something important to give you. After Kyle took a seat with incredulity on his face, Roland slowly picked up his cup to sip some tea and asked, How are the alchemists from the King City? Chief Alchemist replied with a frown, I guess they're just fine. I don't talk with them very much, except about the chemical experiments. If you want to know, you can ask them directly. Roland could tell from Kyle's reaction that alchemists of Alchemist Workshop of the King City seemed to have formed a little clan of their own. They had brought many students here, which was helpful for the chemical industry production but at the same time put pressure on Kyle and his students. Keeping this thought to himself, Roland changed a subject. Now that the 2 acid liquids and smokeless gunpowder have gone into mass production, I plan to set up an independent department to meet with ever-growing demands for these products. He paused a while and continued. Do you want to work as Minister of Chemical Industry? Kyle answered without any hesitation, I remember you've mentioned it before, but... I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I just can't give up my experiments in the labs for some trivial management work, so my answer is still the same. Do not hurry to refuse me. Roland shrugged. I know that you don't want to waste your time on this kind of things, as you devote yourself to chemistry and want to explore its mystery. But what if I can directly show you what you want to know? What? Kalsichi was startled. Roland took something out from his drawer and slowly spread it in front of Kyle. It was a white paper with many squared on it, the periodic table of elements, which he had written last night. This is, the old alchemist's eyes went straight to it. Stretching out his trembling hands, he wanted to snatch it from the king but meanwhile was so afraid to tear it. Didn't you say, you forgot the contents in the blanks? I've remembered lots of details recently, including some about the book Intermediate Chemistry. This time it'll be completed. Roland pulled the table back a little so that Kyle could only stare at it. Your Majesty, Kyle stopped here and closed his mouth, since he had already got what the king meant. Roland smiled and said, that's right. If you become Minister of Chemical Industry, I'll give you this periodic table of elements, complete intermediate chemistry and maybe even advanced chemistry. Roland admired the chief alchemist's enthusiasm toward chemistry but also knew that limited by this era's conditions, Kyle could hardly know more chemical knowledge than a senior high school student did in modern times. Now that he had complete chemistry textbooks, he decided to show them to Kyle. By doing so, he could enable Kyle to have more time to teach more students and effectively reduce the influence of alchemist workshop of the King's City. He also believed that although Kyle preferred chemical experiments to trivial matters in management, as the former chief in the alchemic workshop of Redwater City, he must have a sound knowledge of management and basic organization and coordination skills. I get it. Kyle bowed after hesitating for a moment. I'll serve as your minister. Somehow, Roland found that compared to imposing his will on the others, he became increasingly fond of this method of offering conditions that could not be denied as a bargaining chip in negotiations. He wondered, was this syndrome of a person in power? No matter what, he believed that it was a win-win option. He folded the periodic table of elements and handed it to Kyle, saying, when you've more students, you'll have less trivial things to do by yourself. Here's your bonus paid in advance. Do your best, and your name will be recorded in the history of chemistry. Chapter 639, Isabella. If not for the shackles on her hands and feet, Isabella would have forgotten that she was a prisoner. After she had told Roland's witches that the god stones of retaliation embedded in the walls of the cell could not affect her ability, she had been transferred to an ordinary bedroom guarded by some guards. When she had been sent back to the western region of Grey Castle, she had got a cell similar to the previous bedroom. It was not damp or cold and had no dirty water flowing on the ground. In this quite spacious room, she was offered a bed, a bench and a toilet in a cubicle. All the windows of the room were blocked by iron strips, but warm sunshine could still get through them into the room. The conditions here were much better than that of the secret jail of Pivotal Secret Authority. Having outstanding looks, she had thought that she would get some normal treatment of prisoners of war, but nothing had happened. No one had sneaked into her room at night. She had not been humiliated or tortured. The guards at the door never spoke to her except when they delivered meals to her. The most frequent visitors to her cell were two of Roland's witches. One was said to come from 400 years ago and another one who was blonde always wore a hood. No matter what they had asked, Isabella had answered them honestly. She had even asked them to bring her papers and a quill to write down some recordings of the secret history and demon documents she had read in Pivotal Secret Temple's library. The witches had never tortured her either, but she could tell that the blonde witch wanted to give her a hard time. She felt confused seeing her leave with a cold face every time when she finished answering all their questions. She knew that they would not believe whatever she said, and based on what had happened during each of their visits, she was sure that one of them must be able to detect lies. She guessed that the blonde witch was planning to punish her when she caught her lying, but this thought made her even more confused. She just could not think of a reason for this action, as they could do whatever they want to a prisoner. She felt increasingly oppressed by worry as the time went by. She wondered why Roland Wimbledon had never appeared during the past 2 months. She could think of only 2 answers to this question. First, the king had not woke up yet. Second, he never planned to meet her. Neither of these was good news for her. She believed that after she confessed all she knew, she would be put on trial and then executed. Ready to devote all she had to defeat demons, Isabella had no complaints about her current situation, but waiting to die day after day still stressed her out. She sighed and walked in chains to her bed. She sat down, picked up her quill and spread a blank paper on her laps, thinking that if she could finish writing down all she remembered quickly, she would be able to come to her end sooner. At this moment, she heard footsteps outside. It sounded like more than 2 people were coming to her cell. Isabella's heart vibrated. Her door was pushed open. She put down the quill and turned around. Besides the 2 witches, here came a gray-haired young man. Based on the previous information she had received, she knew he was Roland Wimbledon, the king of Grey Castle. He woke up? Does he come to sentence me? Keeping those thoughts to herself, she stood up and slightly bowed to him. She said with feigned indifference, "I thought you would never come to meet me." To her great surprise, Roland said calmly, "You're Isabella, right? You're the witch who made my god stones of retaliation lose effect. I didn't meant to postpone this meeting with you. I had an incredible long dream and just woke up. I fought against Zero in the dream and I defeated her in the end. However, as the winner, I didn't get everything, her knowledge or skills, as she said." "It's impossible," Isabella blurted. Roland asked with great interest, "Why?" "I guess I can't get what she had, as I'm a man who can never become a witch. It's nothing to do with gender." Isabella shook her head. "The trophy a winner will get in Soul Battlefield is memories and lifespan, which can be owned by any human being, and only the creatures who have those 2 things can step into Soul Battlefield. As for the abilities of witches and magic power, they can't be absorbed by the winner. Otherwise, Zero would have absorbed me." "What do you mean? There are creatures she can't invade and absorb?" Isabella explained, "Animals can't get into the soul battlefield, as they've no intelligence. Even if they did and win, they can never understand human beings' memories. That may also be caused by the difference between species. As far as I know, among the thousands of souls she absorbed, there are some demon and some hybrid demonic beast." She sighed and continued. "But it happened before I was born. I've just heard her mention about it when we were chatting." "Demon and demonic beast?" Hearing what Isabella said, Roland and his witches could not help but look at each other at a loss for words. "Why didn't you tell us about this?" The blonde witch shouted this question to Isabella. "Because this will only increase your anxiety and hardly helps you." Isabella paused and slowed down to explain. Even Zero herself admitted that the memories of the other species were so crazy that they placed a heavy burden on her. She said she had never tried it again after that. The king did not seem to be scared. Instead, he smiled and said, "Interesting. By the way, did Zero mention to you what would happen to the losers in Soul Battlefield? They'll disappear from this world as if they never exist." Roland raised his eyebrow and asked, "Any difference between the losers who give up voluntarily and those who fight to death?" "All of them will disappear, but," Isabel continued after a thought. "Zero seemed to have said that the memories she absorbed could be divided into 2 kinds. Roland seemed particularly interested in this issue and asked, "What are they?" "One kind of memories were disorganized with residual consciousness of the losers. They would affect Zero herself. The other kind of memories were completely open to her. She could read them whenever she wanted." She paused for a moment and continued. "She said that it was harder to recall and easier to forget the first kind of memories. She casually mentioned it once. I didn't ask her for more details at that time, but I'm sure you're an exception. I've never seen anyone like you before, who get no memories at all." Roland closed his eyes and knitted his eyebrows. He seemed to be thinking about something extremely complicated. He remained speechless for nearly 10 minutes and then heaved a long sigh, saying, "I see." What on earth was he thinking? Curious as she was, she still kept her mouth shut. She knew that she should never ask such a question as a prisoner. Roland said to her, "Now, let's talk about you." Chapter 640, Dream World Hypotheses. Isabella slightly lowered her head, waiting for her sentence in silence. Roland sounded calm. "You should think your own ability, not because it's unique, but because it can't kill anyone. No matter how felonious an act you're involved in, such as assisting Zero in attacking me, you're just an accessory offender. I can spare your life, but you still have to atone for your sin, like the others who violate the law. Roland's words somehow took a weight off her mind. She was not afraid of death, but not fond of it, either. As long as you can defeat demons, I'm willing to do everything for you. Roland said slowly, demons are enemies of the mankind. I'll certainly fight against them till death, but my way is different from that of the church. I won't try to win the battle of divine will at the cost of destroying human beings' potential. Given that, you've got to change some of your habits. From now on, you're no longer a pure witch of the church. Instead, you're an atoning witch. Zero, you were wrong. He knew about demons and the Union a long time ago and is even ready to fight the battle of divine will. Indeed, he was a common man whose life and belief would come to the end after decades, but now, he gets your limitless lifespan. Given that, he must be the chosen one of the deities. At this thought, Isabella knelt down with her shackles. She lowered her head, letting all her long hair spread over the floor, and said, "Yes, my lord." When she stood up again, Roland opened his mouth and said, "Here's not the holy city of Hermes, and you're not a servant to me. You're just an atoning person, but I won't send you to the mines to do hard labor for 20 years. All you have to do is to cooperate with Agatha in her research on the magic power." Isabella was startled, wondering, "That's all I have to do for him?" Roland continued to say, "Your atoning period is 5 years. I'll ask Wendy to arrange a new place for you to live, and during this period of time, you don't have to wear any shackles, but you only have limited freedom. That's to say, besides your living place and Agatha's spellcaster tower, if you want to go anywhere else, you'll have to act under the Witch Union's surveillance." "Yes, I see. By the way, are you sure that there are no other witches in the Holy City?" asked Roland. She had answered this question for many times since she had become a prisoner. She thought for a moment and still shook her head, saying, "For this decisive battle, Zero converted all the useless new witches into God's punishment warriors and took all the other witches to the battlefield. There are still many girls in cloisters, but awakenings of new witches seldom happen before months of demons. Vanilla, Margie, and me are probably the only 3 remaining pure witches of the church." Having heard what she said, Roland said nothing. He turned around and walked toward the door. The blonde witch came up and unlocked her shackles. Seeing herself get free hands again, Isabella could hardly believe what had happened. "Is this my sentence? No jail time, no humiliation, and no torture. Is he serious?" She suddenly spoke out, "Your Majesty, what about Vanilla and Margie?" Roland looked back at her and said, "They're better than you. They were just influenced by the distorted ideas of the cloister's education, far from being crazy. If they can give up those thoughts, they may even join the Witch Union." Roland and the 2 witches left. The cell door creaked shut. "So that's it," Isabella felt completely relieved. She lay on her plank bed in the sunshine coming through the window. Despite the glaring light, she squinted up at the blue sky behind the steel bars. What a lovely day, she thought. Back in the office, Nightingale expressed her discontent, saying, "Her punishment is too light. She almost killed you." "It's Zero who almost killed me, not her." Roland handed her a piece of dried fish. She took it with her mouth and mumbled, "She created such a chance for Zero. Otherwise, it was impossible for you to be dragged into Soul Battlefield." Roland explained patiently, "But you can tell she really wants to fight against demons, can't you? She didn't commit an unforgivable crime and I'm just alright. That's enough for her punishment. By doing so, we show all the people that we're willing to spend 1,000 pieces of gold to buy outstanding talents. Spend 1,000 gold royals, and what? I mean propaganda effects." Roland coughed twice and continued. "Seeing her example, more people will understand that as long as they don't break legal bottom line, they'll still get a chance by making atonement. After all, our enemy is demons. To increase our odds of winning the battle of divine will, letting her redeem herself by good services is the best choice." Nightingale twitched her lips and said, "Well, I'll watch her for you." Roland walked to the French window and recalled what Isabella had said. The memories Zero absorbed could be divided into two kinds. One kind of memories was disorganized with a residual consciousness of the losers. They would affect Zero herself. The other kind of memories were complete and open to her. She could read them whenever she wanted. She said that it was harder to recall and easier to forget the first kind of memories. Is this the reason why she repeatedly persuaded me to give in during the Battle of Souls? She suffered no side effects in absorbing the surrenders who willingly gave her all their memories. That's why she stopped at all the crucial moments. She wanted me to give up fighting, in order to get my complete memories. He found that this process seemed similar to the one in which he possessed Prince Roland's body. As Prince Roland's memories were just like that, complete and always there in his head. He could easily recall the prince's memories anytime he wanted to and put them aside when he did not need them. They were like archived files. He did not have to memorize any detail of them, but even after a year when he opened them again they still remained the same as before. Given that Prince Roland had been killed by Garcia's assassin and had no willpower to resist his death at that time, he thought he could be considered a loser who gave up in the Battle of Souls. Now, he was wondering what the strong-willed losers would do. Based on what Isabella had said, this kind of memories with the residual consciousness of the losers would affect Zero herself, including changing her thoughts, personality, and even beliefs. Absorbing thousands of souls had made her complex, technically, a very different person from who she had been before. If she had wanted vengeance on him, she would have poured all those crazy memories into his mind. When that happened, she would end up being shattered, but Roland would not be the same Roland as before. In this chaotic storm of memories, each unyielding soul's willpower would strive for predominance in his mind. Zero would take this chance to come back again. However, out of Zero's expectation, he was not a man of this era. The amount of information a person living in the modern age absorbed in one day was equivalent to that of a person in ancient times did in months or even years. As a man from an era of information explosion, he read and memorized various kinds of information in every waking moment. His mind could keep the useful information and eliminate the meaningless ones by instinct. As a result, all the memory fragments were swallowed up and reorganized, forming a strange new world, his dream world. Unfortunately, he could not ask Zero to confirm this speculation. She had lost all she had including her memories and turned into an innocent child in dream world.